Carrie, do you have a tally of board members present, and do we have a quorum?
We've got 9 voting members. We do have a quorum.
Thank you. Good.
And this is Dwight on audio.
10. And there's Travis.
Well, if we need to call a roll, we can do that. And maybe that'd be a good idea.
I get something pop up on my screen that says meetings being recorded. Can you
Right.
make that go away or does it stay here?
I think you just have to click got it.
Click on got it.
You want to
Afraid
do
to
this?
click on things.
There's the-
Sometimes it might disappear.
Let's see here. This is we just click on
Here we go,
got it.
Mark. Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order. I guess first order of business is the agenda. I don't know if anybody has anything to add to the agenda, or you're happy with the way it is. I think we got most everything covered on there. With that, I'll just get my bit of an opening statement. Most of you know me now, but it's been difficult for 2 years having this Zoom business. And since, the past 2 years, we've had quite a few new members join, so it's kind of hard to get to know each other and trust each other or whatever when you're just doing it through this Zoom business. Hopefully this will be the last Zoom meeting we have to do. But so I won't go into a lot of my background or anything. Most of you know, but I guess I'm reluctantly your new chair. By the last meeting, it was a 5-4 vote, so it's not like overwhelmingly you voted for me, but I've talked to most everybody, I think everybody who sort of opposed or didn't know me. And after having a talk eye to eye about or having a talk direct about maybe our differences of opinion, or were they actually differences of opinion, or we just didn't get a chance to talk to each other and understand where we're coming from. So I think we got all that worked out, and I'm looking forward to a good working relationship with all of you. I just wanted to let anybody call me anytime. We have kind of lousy cell coverage up and down the river here, and I'm outside most of the time. I've got a little excavator business. I run around doing that in locations that I don't get very good connection. So if you don't get me, just leave a text message and let me know a good time to call you back, and I'll give you a call. This is today we're going to have a pretty long meeting with no break scheduled, and I don't know about the rest of you, but I don't go 3 hours without coffee and pee. So just get up and take a break if you have to. I guess with that, we'll take a look at the board meetings or the meeting minutes. Do we have any additions or
Have it turned up, you may want to turn it down.
changes to the working minutes or review? If there is no discussion about the minutes, do I have a motion to approve?
Approved.
Do we have a second?
Approved.
Actually, I guess I should mention there were 2 meeting minutes. So I guess we're open to either one, or we'll cover them both at the same time unless anybody has a problem. So we have a motion, we have a second. Do we have any further discussion of the minutes? If not,
I will second the motion to move to accept the minutes.
Okay, sounds like there's no opposition, so we'll just consider it approved. There's no other further discussion. Okay, the next part of the agenda is introducing the new members. We have two recent new members, Seth Eisenberg. I think you're both on here. I can't see, but yeah,
Yep.
I see Seth.
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, you're both here. Okay. So what I'll do is make a little brief introduction. I've talked to both Seth and Pete, and then I've had you guys take a few minutes and just explain your background. Seth Eisenberg represents the wild wild fish advocacy. He's a New Hampshire native, lives in Bend now. He's got a background in natural resources. He's been 20 years as director of Trout Unlimited. He's a hardcore fisherman, which I guess that makes him an acceptable guy in my eyes, my mind. Pete Gruendijk is the representative from Restoration, and Pete is from Western New York. In fact, talking to him yesterday, we found out that I spent my childhood probably within 20 miles of where he was, working on a farm in the summers. So we're sort of have a background there. Pete lives in Corvallis now, and maybe someday I can teach him how to, or he can teach me how to catch steelhead on a fly. I fly fish a lot for steelhead, but I'm not that effective at it. So anyway, Seth, would you give a few minutes background, introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Well, pleasure to meet everybody. Pleasure to be here. Yeah, I moved back to Oregon with my wife, who's a native here, and 21 years ago. So we've got 2 webfoot kids that are college age. And yeah, I'm passionate about working on conservation issues and particularly thinking in a pragmatic way how we, kind of deal with the circumstance we're in at the moment, particularly relative to climate change and what that's meant for cold water fisheries, including particularly salmon and steelhead. So, I think that the hatchery system proves to be an important tool for us in the current model. And one of the things Scott and I talked about is I think the other thing we have to have is the next cadre, the next generation of folks who are interested in taking on some of the bigger and tough challenges around conservation. And if we don't have, kids who are enthusiastic about salmon and steelhead, we're going to lose some of those folks to really be able to recruit them for the future. So I kind of view this as a multi-generational problem, and I think the hatchery system is
he's one of the new people.
Solution.
Thanks, Seth. Pete?
Yeah.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Pete Gruendijk. I'm a fisheries biologist with River Design Group in Corvallis, and we're a small engineering consulting firm that primarily works on river restoration, habitat enhancement, and fish passage projects and throughout Oregon and throughout the West. We have another office in Whitefish, Montana, so we work kind of throughout Idaho, Montana, Washington, and Oregon. I've been a lifelong angler, grew up fishing for salmon, steelhead, bass, everything in the Great Lakes region, and quickly moved out west where we had more wild fish and native fish. And, it's been a lifelong passion for me. And I've followed this kind of hatchery wild debate for many years and really interested to get involved and see how we can improve things going forward. And so happy to be here and nice to see you all today.
Hey, thank you. Let's see, next on the agenda is reviewing the board member duties. I guess that's me. Let me grab something here. We're stuck in the papers. Yeah, the board, some of you have been in our last couple of meetings, found out we kind of stumbled through the Robert's Rules business, but we're supposed to operate as a board under Robert's Rules order. And I'm no expert at it, but we have a few people on the board that probably, have done a lot more and are experts at it. Hopefully they'll keep us online. But if you're not familiar with the Robert's Rules order, you should probably just go online and get a little short version of it and get up to date, and so we can try do our best to follow the rules. And if I get off track, I appreciate if somebody come in and put me back where we should be. I'd like to go through now some of the duties and activities of the board, OHRC. We are actually governed by, we were created through House bills, And then House bills were turned into statutes. And then statutes were kind of by committee turned into operating procedures. So sometimes we have to go back to at least to the statutes and try to find out what we're supposed to be doing. And so I'd like to review some of those duties and some of that language with you. One thing, and I'll quote some of these numbers in case you want to look them up, but this is Oregon Hatchery Research Center 498.825. If you're not familiar with these things, you can just go online and put ORS, whatever this number is, and it'll connect you. You can pretty much find these regulations, but it says members of the board must be residents of this state who are well informed on matters relating to fish management policy and scientific research, and who demonstrate an interest in research related to the propagation of fish in hatcheries. So we're supposed to keep update on this, read the research papers, try to learn all we can about propagation of fish in hatcheries. So that's part of the regulation. Another one on here is this is 498.827, duties of the Oregon Hatchery Research Center Board. We report to the director of the Oregon Hatchery Research Center. And we're supposed to establish strategic directions and operational objectives for the Oregon Hatchery Research Center. We develop an operating budget is our responsibility. We recommend research projects for the research center. We review and prioritize all research proposals submitted to the OHRC Center before the research takes place, and we prioritize the research. We make recommendations as needed regarding how research projects at the Oregon Hatchery Research Center may be enhanced to meet strategic direction and operational objectives specified in ORS 498.831. And we make an annual report, which we have to approve today. Those are some of the duties. Let me go back here to the first part. Here is 498.827, the duties. Establish strategic direction and operational objectives for Oregon Hatchery Research Center located on Fall Creek near LC, consistent with ORS 496.275. Now, if you go to ORS 496.275, let me repeat this again. It says establish strategic direction and operational objectives for the OHRC located on Fall Creek, consistent with ORS 496.275. So then you go to 496.275, which we're supposed to be consistent with this. This is the salmon restoration, salmon resource protection and restoration regulation. It says the Legislative Assembly hereby declares the necessity to review all options and means for the protection and restoration of Oregon's salmon resource that promote local economic development and enjoyment by all citizens of Oregon. Options and means shall include operation of salmon production facilities in cooperation with the State Department of Fish and Wildlife by both public and private and nonprofit agencies, as well as by public partnerships to meet local production and harvest needs, as well as to restore and maintain wild salmon spawning populations. So that's some of the things that we're by law supposed to be doing. Then some of the activities, this is regulation ORS 498.831. It's Oregon Hatchery Research Center activities. There's several. I'll go through some of them. Conduct research that assists in the implementation and advancement of native fish population recovery, as well as viable fisheries. Conduct research on methods to minimize the genetic and ecological risk to naturally produce native fish when hatchery produced fish are released into the waters of the state. for population recovery or consumptive fishery objectives. And we're also supposed to conduct research to determine the genetic and ecological risk to naturally produce native fish when wild native broodstock hatchery produced native fish are released into the waters of the state. This is something I know since I've been here we haven't done, but I know that research has been done. In fact, I've got the paper right here with Maureen Hess and Sean Narum, whoever they are, that have done just about that exact same thing. And we're supposed to conduct research to determine the effect of hatchery operations on naturally produced native fish and the habitat of naturally produced native fish. That's another one I think we haven't explored much yet. So you can see my point in this is you can see that we're supposed to find the differences between wild fish and hatchery fish and try to minimize those, but we're also mandated to maintain viable fishery and local economic fishery that promotes the local economics, those kind of things too. So they're all in here in the regulations. Then for some of you that aren't familiar with the background, we have three OHRCs funded out of the ODFW budget, and that funding takes care of the annual operating costs of the salaries and utilities at the research center and that sort of thing, but it doesn't really cover the research had been done through grants and that kind of thing. And these three key research projects that we have that we'll be discussing today were proposed to us, but there was no funding, and they needed to carry on through 2 or 3 salmon cycles. So we're out 12 to 15 years or something like that. There was no funding to do that, to carry those through. So we needed to find funding. We went to some legislators. I think Lindsay and Chuck and Cam Perry and I were some that worked pretty hard on this. And we went to our legislators and asked for ideas of how to do this. And what was decided was we would try to pass a bill, get a bill passed that would put a $1 increase in sport fishing licenses and a 3 to 4 cent per pound ad valorem tax on commercial fishermen. And so the legislators kind of went back to their constituents and said, this is what we'd like to do. And they kind of got the feedback that, yeah, we would support that, but we're in harvest. I mean, the reason we're supported is because we want fish out there to harvest and to be able to catch and keep this fishery going. So they agreed to it, and that's where the funding is coming from. It's coming from fishermen. And the next regulation I could give you is 498.833, and it refers to this House Bill 3012. The funding says monies in the fund may be expended only on research projects recommended by the Oregon Hatchery Research Center Board. So for your board members, it's clear that the money's out of this, which amounts to $12 to $15 million in the long term, is our complete responsibility to be sure that's spent wisely. And the fishermen who are supporting this bill, their ultimate goal is to have fish out there to harvest. Realizing these are long-term projects and you don't get results every day out of them or anything implementable maybe in a year or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, but that keep in mind the ultimate goal and who is funding this research.
Hey, Scott, can I ask a quick clarification question?
Yes, sir.
What's the window on the current funding mechanism? How long does that last, and what does the renewal cycle look like?
I'll refer that one back to Mark.
Sure. So we operate on a biennial funding schedule. This current biennium began July 1st of 2021 and runs through June 30th of 2023. And then leading up to that renewal, we have budget forecasts that help us to determine how much we might be able to commit toward new research or ongoing projects through the subsequent. And I'll talk a little bit about that cycle later on today.
Okay, and last thing, not to distract us, is there any sunset on the legislative support on the taxation mechanism for support for OHRC and the board, et cetera? Does that have a sunset clause associated with it, or is that kind of indefinite?
I believe that
date for renewal. We have about 2 years left, Mark, something like that.
it runs through 2027 is my recollection. I'd have to reference some of the documentation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And we would expect, without, if there's no big dissension to it, we would expect legislative renewal of that to continue them to the, what we proposed to be the end of the cycle of this research. So I would imagine it would continue. Any other questions with that? There's one other thing that we operate under, we have a operating a charter that was done in October of 2015, and you can look that up. It's I think the charter is actually right on the website for the research center, isn't it, Mark? I think you can find it there. But as you look through the charter, you might notice the last statement. The charter is not law. That's something that was put together kind of the way we want to operate. The board to approve this, but also the last part of it says the board may modify the charter by a majority of the vote of the board taken during a board meeting. So, and any substantive revisions to the charter will be reviewed by the ODFW director. So if you look through the charter and you question it, or you think we ought to modify it, that's something we can do as a board. So that would be one of our duties as well. So hopefully I kind of covered what we're supposed to be doing, and I feel pretty obligated with this funding. When we went to the House Ways and Means, wasn't Lindsay the House Ways and Means Committee we went to testify to get the funding or try to get this bill passed? I think with Brad Witt and some of the people in the House Ways and Means. But when we got fishermen and commercial fishermen, sports fishermen to ante up $15 million, and now I get a lot of questions by fishermen's group, and I've had 4 different legislators call me in the past few weeks with concerns about are the fishermen and people supporting that going to get their money's worth out of these projects? And I don't think people in general have enough knowledge of these projects and where they're going. And so we have some communication work to do with these, but it is the board's responsibility to watch these things carefully, be sure they're on track, to be sure we're on budget, spending a lot of people's money. And so I want you to be involved in these projects and pay attention, and we can alter them, we can change them, we can continue them through completion. But if at some point any of these projects that we'll be reviewing, we don't think that they're headed the right direction or they're going to have an outcome that's implementable, we should look at what we could do to alter them or change the direction a little bit, or come up with the end result that we're looking for. So it's an important responsibility of the board. I think that's about it. If there's any questions about our duties and responsibilities, and I encourage you, I got into looking up all these regulations because people were questioning me about what direction we're going, and I didn't know if we're going the right direction or not. And then, so you go try to look up the rules and regulations and the way we're operating, and unfortunately, they can be interpreted in different ways too. So it's hard to say, but we do have the written duties, and I encourage you to look them up and see for yourself. Okay, if nothing further there, the next item on the agenda is the OHRC Director Search Update with Selena.
And Scott, I just got in contact with Selena this morning. She's racing to her office at the moment. She got in late from a trip yesterday. So she'll be on at 9:40. We're running a little ahead, as you can see. So if we would like, we could either take a break, or maybe we could flip-flop the board vice chair election, and the timing should then work out for Selena to arrive to offer that update.
Okay, we can do that. The vice president selection. Current vice president has been Chuck Pavlik, been vice president for about 2 or 4 years, and his term is now up. So we need to elect a new vice president. The term will be 2 years and renewable for 2 more, I think. That's what it is. So I guess if there's no questions, I guess, any questions about that? About what the term is, or?
And for the record, I believe we're speaking about a vice chair position.
Vice chair, yeah, excuse me. So do we have any nominations for vice chair? Somebody like to nominate somebody else? We're not very good at elections. They go pretty rough. So I'm asking, do we have any nominations for vice chair?
Hey Scott, maybe perhaps you could just talk about what the duties of the vice chair would be, and that might encourage some people.
Good idea. The vice chair position is really fairly simple. As long as the chair is doing his job, the vice chair can support him. But for some reason the chair can't make the meeting, then the vice chair would direct the meeting. But other than that, it's pretty much, if you look through that charter with the operation duties, I think it's right in here. Here, the duties of the chair. The chair may delegate specific responsibilities to other board members as appropriate. The chair's responsibility are to facilitate, but not to direct the work of the board. Working with the board members, the chair schedules the sites and meetings, develops agenda items, arranges for special board meetings, organizes and conducts board meetings. The chair may serve in the capacity of chair for 2 consecutive terms. In the temporary absence of the chair, the first co-vice chair serves in his or her place. So duties of the vice chair. Vice chair serves in the chair's temporary absence of the chair and assists the chair in the performance of the chair's duties. So it's sort of a backup, and that's as simple as the duties are. Since I've been on the board, and I was vice chair for first 4 years, and I really didn't do much of anything except visit with the chair. As long as the chair, well, I think I filled in for him once when he was out, but that's about it. So not a lot to do, unless you want it. We do need a vice chair, though. Anybody like to nominate themselves? Carl, you're my backup on these kind of things. You're supposed to tell me how it's supposed to work.
Well, my experience in these things, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I guess if I can, if nobody else is willing to nominate somebody, I would nominate Chuck to continue, if that's proper. And since we have no other nominations, and if Chuck would accept, so I guess that's the question out there now. Is that proper, Carl? Can I do that?
Sure.
Okay. Chuck, would you accept the nomination?
You say
Chuck,
Chuck.
are you there? Yeah. I said, Chuck, would you accept the nomination for vice chair?
I would accept it, but I want to make sure that we're within Robert's Rules of Order.
Well,
We are.
yeah, we have to make a motion. If you're willing to accept the nomination, then we need a motion to have Chuck, to elect Chuck as vice chair. Do we have a motion? You guys, you can talk too.
I nominate
Go
him.
ahead.
How do I
Do
get
we
this
have a
thing?
second?
I have a second.
Who
How do I get this thing to go make a
made the
second?
nomination?
How do I do that?
So even though I can't vote, I guess I can make a motion, and I move that we vote to see if board wants Chuck as the vice chair. So
Second.
now we need a
So we
second,
have
if nobody agrees.
We have a nomination of Chuck as chair. We have a motion to elect Chuck as vice chair. And who made the motion?
I did, Carl.
Carl? Carl made the motion. Do we have a second?
Oh, okay. So I'll second it.
We had Ted is seconded.
Hmm.
So we have a motion to elect Chuck as vice chair for the next couple of years. We have a second. Is there any further discussion?
Or other nominations?
Yeah, or other nominations?
Mr. Chair, could I interject with a comment?
Sure.
I think it's relevant here to note that neither, at least to my read, neither statute nor charter indicates that there are term limits for the vice chair position. It does, there are term limits for the chair position, but to my understanding, Chuck would be eligible for another term because, again, as I see, there's no limit on the number of terms that the vice chair can serve under current charter.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Thank you. So we have a motion to elect Chuck as vice chair. We have a second, and barring any further discussion, the motion would be to elect Chuck as vice chair is passed. We need a vote, I guess. We need a vote unless there's.
Well, we got to vote. So I'll motion to close discussion and move to vote.
There we go. All in favor?
This is to close
Okay,
discussion.
Close discussion. Okay, thanks.
I think we got to do that first, and then make sure that there's nobody that gets cut off relative to wanting to continue it, and then we can move. Then we can vote. So this will be the vote to close discussion on the matter. Aye. All in favor?
Sounds good to me.
Actually, do we have their vote function on? Let's see. You can usually use the raise hand function. I don't see it on here.
I think the easiest is to do a roll call. for marketing.
There's no further discussion. We can
Well,
call it done.
right. Yeah, just go to the vote, I guess, unless anybody else chimes in that they want to continue discussion. That we need to do a roll call for that.
No, I think, is anyone opposed to moving to a vote?
There's no one opposed, then the motion would pass, correct? Okay, so let's consider the motion passed with there's no dispute about it. Okay.
I think we actually have to do the vote, Scott. Well, I think we've got to do. I think we've got to do the vote. Yeah.
Okay, we can do a vote. I thought we didn't have to.
That was to close discussion. We can do it the same way. Probably instead of having to do roll call. I think it'd be, given Zoom, reasonable route would be to basically say if anyone's opposed versus, and enumerate that versus, and then assuming anybody's not opposed would be in favor of voting for the vice chair, and then anybody's going to abstain, but not to make it too overcomplicated.
We've had people abstain. I think we need to know if anybody's abstaining.
Right.
My cheat sheet says if every comment is in favor of the motion, the chair may ask, is in the sense of the meeting, is it the sense of the meeting that this motion be adopted? If there's no opposition, it can be recorded as a passed motion. If there's no opposition.
Oh, yeah.
If you'd like a vote, we can have a vote. But
no, that's a good way to do it. No, exactly.
It can be passed motion. So if there's no opposition, it can be recorded as a passed motion. So I'd suggest we record it as a passed motion and move on if there's no further discussion.
So,
okay.
Mr. Chair, by moving on, do we then move to a vote for Chuck Pavlik as vice chair, or has that, just for clarity?
Well, like I say, I'm no expert on this. I'm no expert on this, but I'm reading you what it says in my short guide to parliamentary procedure. If every comment is in favor of the motion, the chair may ask, is it the sense of the meeting that the motion be adopted? If there is no opposition, it can be recorded as a passed motion. And there's been no opposition. I'm not against the vote, of course. I'm just speeding up the process so we have time to go pee if we need to. If you'd like a vote, we can go for a vote, but we don't need to.
I believe the decision lies with you and the board.
Would everyone like to vote? Or can you, with no opposition, you consider it passed? That's the question. Is there any opposition?
Since nobody's speaking up and nobody's telling us they're abstaining, I suggest we just consider it passed.
We can consider it passed. Okay. It's done.
So now we need a declaration from the chair.
Oh, we've had a motion to elect Chuck as chair, as vice chair. The motion was seconded. There was discussion. There was no opposition. So we consider the motion passed. Chuck is now vice chair. Okay.
Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you. Appreciate the help, guys. Okay. Is Selena here yet?
Yes, she is.
Oh, there you are. Popped up. Selena, could you give us an update then on where we are with the search, director search?
Sure thing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks everybody for giving me a few minutes today, and I can answer some questions if you have them as well. The materials from the two people we interviewed were sent to Kurt Melcher for review, and after that review, Kurt's recommendation was for Bill Ardren. However, Bill got an offer for an advanced position in U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and chose to take that position instead. And so we have been in negotiations with Dr. Sean Narum, who was also well regarded through the interview process, and a lot of folks really appreciated the strong science that he would bring to the center and to OSU and to our department. And so we have been working on that. Sean is currently, as you know, at CRIPVIC. He's based in Twin Falls, Idaho, and his wife is also in need of a position. So we've been working on that. That takes some time, as you can imagine. And the holdup at the moment for him is that we have to go through a process of review to grant him tenure. And so that process is starting now. I have to get external reviewers' comments for that. So professors, full professors in other institutions. And I'll be doing that this week, hoping I'll put them on a fairly short timeline, and then our promotion and tenure committee will review those letters and the documents and make a recommendation to the provost of the university to actually grant Sean tenure. Assuming that all goes smoothly, then I would anticipate other aspects. I know actually already that other aspects of the offer letter have been accepted. Sean and his wife Ginger are talking about living in Newport instead of Corvallis, in part because of the strong collaborations and research ties that they would have with folks with the genomics labs at the coast. And Bob Cowan, director of Hatfield Marine Science Center, has graciously offered some bench space and office space to Sean if he comes. So that's where we're at. My guess is at this point, because they would need to sell their house and so on, that we're looking at an August 1st start date. So sorry it's taking so long. These things do take a long time, as you can imagine, but we're hoping that things do seem to be moving in the right direction right now. And Sean did say that he would be interested in interacting with all of you in advance of him actually start. Oh my God, there he is. And that's great. I didn't even realize you were here, Sean. So do you want to say a few words?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm just here to say a quick hello and get a sense for these board meetings. So I'll just say that I did have the opportunity to visit last month. I was impressed by the facilities there at the OHRC and got the opportunity to meet a few folks. So looking forward to some of the research opportunities that will be there. I think there's lots of great things to work on together. And so we'll see how things come along over the coming months with Selena. I think we're coming to agreement on a number of things. It's just taking a bit of time to resolve all the details. So thanks for your patience.
Any
Is there anybody have any questions? Okay, thanks, Selena and Sean. Let's see where we are, Mark. Facilities update with Jen.
Next up, we have a
Over there.
facilities update from Jen Krejcik.
Yeah, okay, I guess we're there. Hey, Jen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll break all the rules and take my mask off for a second here, guys. Okay. So we have been busy. I got a whole 2 pages for you. Our host, so I'm going to start with staff. Our host, Alan, he took in a temporary job at Wizard Falls that started on February 1st, so he has left. We don't have another host scheduled until he's supposed to be back in November. So we're open for hosts there. Last time I told you that Brian Willett had gotten a job at Marion Forks, and he left as of January 1st. We hired Bailey Mosier, and he started on February 7th, and he's doing well so far. We have an Oregon Coast Community College intern this term. He's almost done with his 50 hours, and I assume we'll be getting at least one more for the spring term after spring break. So that's helpful to have those guys around again. For our education and outreach, we've had limited progress made on the outreach. We always think in the winter there's not as much fish culture going on. We're going to be able to catch up on some of this desk work, and then it rains heavily, and then it snows, and trees fall, and we get caught up in keeping the facility going. So we've been doing a lot of water and weather and fish culture type stuff over the last 3 months. We are looking forward to the potential to have classes back here, if reopening goes as anticipated. And on that note, we have been contacted about a couple of groups that would like to come out later in the spring, and we'll be connecting with them in the near future to kind of talk through some of the logistics of that and see if we can get them out here. Along with that, we've started thinking about having free fishing day and the possibility of that. I've heard that a few are happening at various times. So that's a call I need to make over to Alcy and see if Matt and Eric are interested in doing that. Talk to you too, Chuck, about that, and see if that's something that we can make happen this year. Oregon AFS was last week. Craig gave a presentation on the Angler Caught Brood project. I was a co-author on 2 of the other talks that were given there, and am the chair of the fish culture committee, so attended that subcommittee meeting, taking over for Ryan Kocher there. So facility maintenance stuff. We received and installed the grading and railing for a walkway so that we can safely access that big slide gate that we had put in a couple of years ago. Now, if we need to do any work on there, we can get equipment. We can get ourselves out there safely, regardless of the water levels. We've had some tree work to be cleaning up. The snow dropped a really big tree on our road that accesses the Carnes Creek intake. So we had Weyerhaeuser come out. They actually own that road. So this is the second winter in a row that something larger than we can deal with has fallen on that. We call Weyerhaeuser, they call a contractor, they come out and deal with it for us, which is a pretty good deal. But there's still some cleanup on our end for that. We did all of our annual crane, fire extinguisher, fire system up inspections in the last 3 months, and everything's good there. In September, maybe, we found a rotting foundation on one of the houses, and we've gotten the go-ahead to get that fixed. So that process is starting. I have no idea how long it will take to get that moving, but it is coming along. And another process that's going is for our intake work on the apron. That is in contracts right now, getting a contract written up so that we can put that out to bid and have that work done as early in the summer as we're allowed to do. We had some pretty heavy rain last weekend and found a leak on the fume hood exhaust pipe. So we called some roofing contractors. A couple of them came out to look at it, give us some quotes. Hopefully we'll get some bids on that. But we did have one that said, well, it might be this, and he threw some caulk up there. So next time it rains, we'll see if that worked. And then we also met with Paul Olmsted, who's the assistant district bio in the North Coast, or Central Coast, wherever we are here. And he talked to us about doing some bank restoration. And so that's something that we're going to start working on, source some willows and some cedars and, try to stabilize the bank around the building itself. There are places where there are trees that have been out in the river, and these high water events of the last couple of years have taken them out. We're having the alders are starting to die. And so we're just trying to get ahead of that a little bit, get some other trees and brush in there to hold things together. And then go from there. For research, we took down our in-house projects in early February. That took quite a couple days. We didn't have outside projects here, so pretty much this year we had 2 tanks of surrogate fish, and everything else was ours. And so we had 14 tanks of projects that we took down. And I've run statistics on them, and I'm working on writing a summary of results for this year's study and the last 3 years of studies. I know that I don't have a ton of time today for you guys, so I won't go into it now. The only thing I'll say is those projects were things that were identified as priorities for us to look at by David and Joseph. And so we've been kind of working through them. So that's the egg size sorting, feeding a modulated diet as opposed to a daily diet, and just directing flow around the tank instead of just having water come in, water go out as normally. We also did tank structure, and those structure project tanks are going to be borrowed by the surrogate project to do a cortisol test. So a couple of years ago, they did a big study looking at cortisol response to a stressor in Chinook, and that's something they'd like to move forward with trying in steelhead as well. I've got steelhead that have been there, and so we're just going to kind of run it and see how it goes, just to kind of get an idea if that's something that's worth pursuing with a full scale. We also met with Miriam, Mike Bloom's master's student, and we're working with her to get some structures prepped for their projects this year. So she's super enthusiastic about it, which is fun. Got us parts list. We've been ordering parts, and we'll have her out here to learn how we're setting those things up. We also are working with Amy Reed and the Alcee Hatchery on a thiamine project and how best to administer thiamine, whether it's an injection to the female broodstock or a bath for the eggs, or even potentially doing a flow through treatment on fry later. And then next week we're having our semi-annual fish, our semi-annual A-cup inspection. So we anticipate that going well, but you never can tell with those things, right? We keep everything as close to their standards as we can, so it should be good. And as far as the adult trap goes, we finished our coho run really strongly, ended up with 1,065 coho, which is about 500 more than we've ever gotten before. There were only 71 jacks in that group, 482 females and 512 males, so it was a really nice run. And there were some really nice fish this year. With the low and cold water in February, we basically have no steelhead back. We got something like 11 last week. A couple of those were hatchery strays. So our wild fish total for the year is 12 fish, 9 males and 3 females. And a big part of that is just how dry it's been. The other thing that could be affecting that is they can clear our dam really easily if the water levels are right, and that rain brought our water levels up to a place where they could probably clear the dam most of last week. We did notice yesterday that there's a pair spawning out behind the building. So they're around, just not making it through the trap. But we have handled over 1,500 fish this year, which is that's a good record. Last year was over 1,100, and that was the best we'd had. So the last 3 years we've had over 1,000, and it just is getting better. So it works. It works. I guess that's all I've got, unless you guys have questions.
I have a question. Can you hear?
Yep.
How is the slide doing?
It has done nothing that that we can see. We've had really clean water this year. I don't think, to be honest, I don't think that there's been any sediment, like visible sediment colored water, if that makes sense. And I don't know what that means as far as where that water is going, because obviously it has rained. It's not the driest year we've ever had. Definitely not the wettest. It's up there as a dry year. But it's done nothing this year.
So the slide settled down then?
For now, yeah.
Good.
Potentially
Excellent.
the loose stuff came down last year, and now we may be in a situation where we're kind of waiting for it to destabilize, and then some more will come down. But I am not the expert. You know, there's a guy on here from River Design who can probably speak way more to this than I can. I don't even, you know, I can reach out to Eric Suring. I haven't had him out recently to do a drone flight. But even walking, you know, up the road where you can see it, it doesn't look like very much has happened.
Jen, this is
for the new board members who might not be familiar or haven't visited a facility. What Jen's talking about, and Ted with the slide, is upstream from where the research center is. There's the whole mountain is just kind of slowly moving downhill, and it was a huge concern right in the beginning. It still is a big concern. It could also, you know, possibly block the stream and the creek through there. But it's being very carefully monitored by Weyerhaeuser and who owns the timberland. But it's a concern. We've been afraid to bring kids up to the research center, the school kids up there, to do things because of the liability of a potential slide. So it's a pretty big deal. I hope next meeting we can be at the research center so everybody can take a look at what's going on. Also, maybe we get Pete up there, Jen. He's a restoration guy. Maybe he can figure out how to take care of your bank there by the building. That would be a good deal.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, our instructions will basically get some cedars, get some willows, shove them in places, and, you know, go for it.
Jen has, this is Chuck, has Weyerhaeuser talked to you about the warning devices that they were talking about 2 years ago installing for early warning system on that slide? So there would be some time for evacuation from the facility there if it ever happened. Have they given up on the warning systems or what?
As far as I know, we have a warning system with our level alarm. So if there's a drop in the creek, which would be caused by it being blocked, substantially. We know within a half an hour of that happening. Based on our experience well, now it's been over a year at this point. In December 2020, we know that half an hour is a good amount of space for you to know that something has happened. And if that blockage were to break before we were to evacuate, then the blockage did not build up a whole lot of water behind it. If it breaks after we evacuate, then we're gone, and it doesn't, we're gone. So we do have that warning system. It works really nicely. We have installed an outdoor siren that we can activate to kind of let others know. So if we have hosts, they don't wear a radio. And so, we can flip that switch, and if they hear that going off, then okay, it's time to load up your trailer and get out of here. So we do know within about a half an hour of something happening.
Well, I guess at least that's something, huh?
Yeah, it works great.
I mean, you're I'm not so concerned about warehouser, but you guys whose home is up there and your families, that's why we need it to be as good as we can possibly get it as far as warnings go.
Yeah, I don't know that you could do much better than what we've got.
Well, good. If you're happy with it, then I'm happy with it. Another
Yeah,
question.
thanks, Jen. It's a good report. Excuse me.
Do you had something else, Chuck, or no?
Yeah, Jen, your number that you had on the 1065 coho, well, I didn't get when that was. Was that this fall or what?
Yeah, that was 2021, 2022 season. So I think we got our last fish in January, and probably our first one came in October. So October to January.
So it looks like over the last few years, those coho numbers on Fall Creek have increased. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think, and I could pull this up real quick. I think we've been over the last. So yeah, this year's going to be 1,000. Last year was 460. The year before was 550. The year before was 470 or 437. So yeah, we've been over 400 for 4 years in a row now. Now prior to that, we were over 200. So there were some years that weren't so good before that, or under 200, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, the last 4 years have been really great.
Those figures are very important because, and Mark, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong on this, but the OHRC, the numbers that Jen is able to produce and come up with, those are the only numbers that I'm aware of on the LC that is used to help determine the fishery on that river. Am I correct, or am I missing something?
I believe we also do spawner surveys throughout the basin. I think we get carcass counts.
Yeah, they definitely did that this year. Definitely saw them out there this year.
Yeah, there's been a ongoing comprehensive design for spawning surveys throughout the coast. that gives us a more widespread look at the spawning escapement in each watershed, including the LC. So the Fall Creek stuff is more interesting than it actually is used for fish management.
No, we get valuable data from the OHRC, but we have a statistically robust survey of coho up and down the coast that runs each year. Thanks, Steve, for rounding out my answer.
Okay, thanks, Jen. Appreciate the report. Very good.
For sure.
We're pretty close to on schedule, so we'll keep on moving. The next item is the board annual report. This is the legislative report that goes to the Director of Fish and Wildlife Commission, and back to the legislators. You should have received, first was the draft report by Mark, which was, appreciate all the effort and detail Mark put into that. It was like 52 pages long. I'm sure everybody read every page very carefully. But then after reading the report, there was a revision came out that I sent to, I think everybody got it, but probably not the new members. I didn't get that. That included some changes. One was changing the, asking the legislature for clarification of the intent of the laws governing OHRC. After about an hour discussion with Sean Clements, I reluctantly agreed to pull that out of there, so I won't pursue that. He said that asking for a change in the clarification of the law is something that should be done in some mechanism other than in our annual report. And so we agreed to that. So it will probably be pursued through the Department of Justice or a House bill this summer legislative session. So that revision is kind of off the reports, so you can ignore that. Another revision on there was with the report on the hatchbox incubation box study. There was some language added on to Mark's report there. I got it here somewhere. Yeah, we added on to it that after Mark described the study done up there in our artificial stream channels at the research center, we added on to that, and you should have this. This is the additional revision added on. That Mark said, foremost among findings were hatchboxes produced more fry per egg than stream-side incubators, though the size and configuration of the commercially produced boxes used in her study were difficult to load, prevented many fry from escaping the device, and appeared to generate tail deformities. Added on to that was Mark's statement. Added on to that was this problem was primarily due to an imperfection in the study design, where the escape holes were too small to admit some of the fry. However, these minor flaws can be easily remedied by the manufacturer. For more information, you can look up the Hatchbox manufacturer at incubator at scotty.com. Hatchbox studies indicate that the survival rates from fry is often 65 to 95% compared to natural rates of 5 to 20%. Hatchboxes can be a very effective low-cost tool for supplementation to rebuild diminished wild stocks. It is anticipated that wildlife fish will be produced posing little or no risk to native origin fish when using wild, specifically when using wild broodstock egg source for spawners. Another benefit of Hatchbox program is it's an excellent tool for volunteer relations or for public relations and volunteer participation in fish propagation and restoration. This was put together, this revision was what Chuck wanted to see added on to there. And I agree with him, but we did have another revision to that statement by Steve Jacobs. So I guess that's up for some discussion with the board, how you want this to be put into the annual report. I'll leave it up to Chuck, but I found last night, I'd like to this report done. This is in the Journal of Fisheries Management in 2020. It's done by 4 scientists. It's a 24-page long report. Pretty interesting. It's in-stream. The title is In-Stream Egg Incubators Produce Hatchery Chinook Salmon with Similarities to and Differences from Natural Juveniles. Supplementing fish populations at egg stage is a low-cost alternative to hatchery rearing that is presumed to improve adaptation to local natural conditions. The Shoshone-Bannock tribes began supplementing Chinook salmon in Panther Creek, Idaho at the egg stage in 2014. The Chinook salmon were artificially fertilized and reared to eye up in the hatchery and then planted in custom-made stream incubators for volatile release and natural rearing. And then on down through, it says, as fall par, hatchery origin fish differed from natural origin fish in terms of their length and dispersal behavior, but they were of similar length and condition at their immigration from the Panther Creek and exhibited no significant difference in downstream survival through the Federal Columbia River Power System. Actually, it's a very interesting report to look up. So it's very positive towards potential positive use of incubation boxes. With that, I'm going to turn the discussion back over to Chuck, since this was his input into this report. He's more familiar with incubation boxes than I am. And then Steve could give his input.
So actually, before we do that, Mr. Chair, according to our agenda, I would be presenting this report to the board. Correct?
Yes, and I guess I'm kind of an interlude to you doing that.
So if we could pause for a moment, and I'll offer a brief introduction of the report to the board, and then we can continue with this discussion.
That's a good idea.
Acceptable to you?
Sorry. Should have done it that way. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. As Mr. Chair indicated, you all should have received a copy of the draft report about 2 weeks ago with ample time to review prior to today. I hope. I know everyone's busy, and it is a lot of material to cover. It's covering a year's worth of work out at the OHRC and everything that has been done there and the actions of the board and the implications of the research. I'm just going to share a couple of points with you. Can everyone see that screen? So this report follows the format and the developmental approach that was established by the board by vote back in 2014. So the format that we're using here is one that was established by this board a number of years ago. So I've been following on that precedent in developing the draft, and the board established at that time that the report would be drafted by ODFW staff and then incorporate the comments and revisions recommended by the board, like those that you've mentioned, Scott. So it provides an account of OHRC research findings, and you can find those on pages 14 to 17, 23 to 33, as well as board recommendations and research applications. I think it's worth noting that I've added in a number of new elements to this report this year. There's a brief section on OHRC directorship, which is, of course, very relevant in this past year and hasn't been in the past. There's also a summary of research evaluations by the board. This was something, a new process, so there's an account of that. And we also have a brief account of the research workshop and the request for proposals process. That would, all of those things were new to the OHRC in 2021 and are described in the report. I think it's also worth noting here, no, I absolutely have to call attention to the fact that this report is pulled together not just by me, but I received tremendous help from our researchers, Dr. Michael Banks, Carl Schreck, Mike Bluen, as well as Jen Kratchik from the OHRC. Oh gosh, I hope I'm not forgetting anyone right now. It's a huge team effort to pull this report together. And certainly your comments will help shape the final. And with that, I think we can move on and continue on with the discussion. Chuck, I'd be happy to hear more about the comment on I'd be interested to hear more comments about the study design of the Hatchbox study up the OHRC stream channels. Frankly, that design was brought to the board, who had an opportunity to review it and approved of it. The boxes that we use, as you know, were industry manufactured boxes designed for Chinook salmon. I think they're coming out of Canada. That's my recollection. And maybe their Chinook eggs are smaller than ours, but when we went to load Elk River Chinook salmon eggs into the boxes, well, the loading tray, they simply would not fit. So I got out, I went to the drill press and I drilled out every one of those 100 holes to be able to fit the eggs, which was easy enough, but it took time. Then we were able to load those eggs into the hatch boxes, but we found that later the Chinook salmon were apparently maybe so large, our Oregon Chinook salmon, that they couldn't exit the exit holes of the Chinook salmon model Scotty hatch boxes. Frankly, I don't see that as an element of study design. That's an issue with the technology itself, the device itself. Those are two different things. Could Scotty address this issue? Maybe, I don't know. It's worth hearing from them, sure. But it was certainly an issue and one that we reported. Our student, Megan Erickson, Megan Howell, provided a full report of the research, and there's a link to that in the OHRC's annual report. So just a few comments there, and then I'll turn things back over to you, Mr. Chair, to proceed with the discussion.
Mark.
Okay. Yep, go ahead and comment.
Yeah, Mark, a question for you. When you drilled those holes out and they were of approximately the size that you wanted them to assist those fry escaping from the box, and I thank you for that. That was great, I'm sure, quick thinking on your part to fix a problem, and you did. But as far as Scotty changing those, that's no issue. They can drill a little larger hole in all those boxes for the escape route, and it'd be a done deal. I don't know. I think more research needs to be done on the boxes, because an Alvin and a fry, if the holes are too large to accommodate the fry escaping, but if they're large enough where microinvertebrates, whatever it is, the bugs in the creek, if the idea of the holes is not for them to be able to get into the box and destroy the eggs and the fry. So there needs to be probably a little research done to figure out what size the hole should be. And as far as this go around, it may be not even worth consideration, because the eggs from the Elk River, as far as I know, they're some of the biggest eggs in the state. And so are their salmon. If you have big fish, you have big eggs. If you have big eggs, you have big fry. And I might be wrong on that opinion, but I think that's the way nature works. So yeah, there's a lot of questions that we don't have answers to. But it's what impresses me the most is when you're talking about 5 or 10% hatch numbers. And with the Scotty boxes, you're talking about 65 to 90%. That right there tells you it's worth looking into. And I think it warrants a little more research to be done. It wouldn't be much, it wouldn't take much. And those boxes, you got to think of them like your car. In the trunk, you got a spare tire. It's a tool. And that's what these boxes are. They're a tool. They're not something that's going to be used and left in the streams all the time, or even off and on for long periods. There's something that's in and out. And with those numbers, those hatch success numbers, I don't think we can choose to ignore this. These boxes are something that can be done. And like I say, I think we need to look at it and do a little more research and see where we can use it. If you have spawning beds, just take as an example Fall Creek or any creek in the state, and you have spawning beds that may stretch off and on for a quarter of a mile here and a half of a mile there, then you could plant these boxes kind of like a landmine. And they're going to be there. And when their fry emerge, the box is ready to come out of the water. So you're not leaving anything that isn't natural in the stream. There's just a lot of pluses that I don't think have been really explored. I think this is just the beginning. Okay, Scott.
I don't mean to interrupt, but first I want to underscore my appreciation for all the effort that you and Ted and other board members made to get the boxes, for the hatch boxes, for us to evaluate. That was the purpose of our work, was of course to evaluate those hatch boxes. It would be dereliction of duty for us not to report the issue that we ran into of fry not being able to escape them. So that's just, that was one of our findings. We do have other things in this board report to address, though. Not that we need to jump forward too far. I think we can maybe wordsmith that section of the report a little bit to acknowledge this possibility to improve the hatch boxes. And I think our research demonstrated that there's a need to improve the hatch boxes to be able to allow fry to escape without deformities. And so we can address that point. There's a lot to talk about here, maybe, but that is, of course, just one section of the report to address. I think we need to come up with a way to move forward here on this discussion, though, and keep on track with our agenda, too.
that sounds good. Steve and I had kind of a fun discussion last night over his revision. He said he didn't think there was any research that showed hatch boxes are effective, but I didn't have to work too hard until I did find some, Steve. So there is some positive stuff out there, but I hear where you're coming from too. But that's fine with me, Mark. If it's okay with the board, we'll just wordsmith that a little bit.
I would just, I don't want to belabor this, but I would just want to emphasize that I think we're overstating the potential benefits and utility of hatch boxes. On the coast, there was an evaluation where we have evaluated hatch boxes and found that they weren't effective in increasing coho juvenile abundance. And also in the guidance for our conservation of fish on the coast, the coastal conservation plans, hatch boxes are not called for, only for special cases to potentially reseed habitat above previously existing barriers or for educational purposes. And there are risks of spreading fish around. And as far as limiting factors, it's common that spine escapement is not a limiting factor as far as overall adult salmon production. So to overstate the hatch boxes are going to be a solution, I think kind of it's more of an editorial comment that it's not appropriate for this report. I just want to emphasize that.
Yeah, I don't think of them as a solution. I think of them as a helping tool when needed in a particular stream where for some reason there's no spawning going on when there was in the past. This is a way to kickstart it. Put a bunch of fry in areas that we know were used in the past by salmon. And maybe you only do it 1 year, but in 3 or 4 years, check the runs and see if that area is being used more. And I don't know, not being a biologist, and that was my mistake in life, I believe. But it's, I have a rapport with Scotty up in Canada, and I tell him about this problem, and I know what they're going to ask me, Mark. They're going to ask, how big do you think the holes should be to accommodate Oregon Chinook salmon? I don't know. I'm hoping that you do. So,
excuse me here. I think
our discussion here is getting a bit off track for discussing the report.
Yeah.
I need to kind of keep it on schedule, and we're drifting off, getting into a little too much detail on this. As far as discussion of incubation boxes, I think we need to take this up in another board meeting as a topic, and we need to gather together the different documented research before we make a decision. There is research out there that says positive things. I haven't really seen papers that show negative stuff, but there may be out there, and let's look at it in another meeting. In the meantime, the report should probably at least indicate that it is a potential tool in certain conditions. But Mark, we probably need to pass a motion or get a motion passed to go ahead with this report, since it is due to the legislature. So without having it in the final form, I guess we need to do a little bit of wordsmithing on it till we're comfortable with it between you and me. I guess we can, and then get the report finalized and sent off. I guess we could send it back maybe to the board for a final version, or if the board's comfortable, we could just make a motion now to accept the report with a few minor revisions, wordsmithing revisions to come, and then get that report sent off. Any discussion on that, what you'd like to see?
I think the problem is not knowing what those minor revisions would be. I think Steve Jacobs has a good point. This is not to basically disagree with what Chuck is saying at all, but basically the report leaves the impression of somebody in the public reads this with those percentages. They jump to one conclusion, which is very different than what the intent of the study is. So I would encourage you that if there is going to be revision about that Steve be involved in helping that. So it's just more the tone of it, more than could it be used as a tool? Of course it could.
This is Tom Alcar.
Yeah.
I read through the edits on Steve's part, and I thought he did an excellent job. I'm confused right now as to I wouldn't vote for this annual report because I don't know what it is now. We had the original version that Mark did a great job, and then Scott put a lot of in there, not just a few things, but quite a bit. And then there was edits with Steve. So I don't know what it is now. I don't know what the report is. And so I certainly couldn't vote for it because I don't know what it is now.
Yeah, and I would agree that, having numbers in there, I saw the percentages and the edits, and I wouldn't support including those kinds of numbers without peer-reviewed literature being cited to show those types of numbers. So yeah, I'd like to see what those edits might be before it gets approved and sent.
This could be done very quickly and easily with a revision to send to the board saying, and with track changes, you don't have to read the whole report again.
For all the revisions that were put in the first one I sent out are pretty much retracted. I think that's all been taken out of there. It can all be taken out, except the question with Chuck has he wants to see something put in there with the incubation boxes. The report is sort of left with a negative attitude towards incubation boxes, and Chuck would like to see something in there saying that they are a positive tool in certain conditions that can be used. But
hey,
Scott,
Scott,
somebody could always make a motion.
How about we just
Somebody could always make a motion that we pass the report as Mark put it out without any revisions. If you would like to do that, we could take a board vote on it that way. The revisions don't have to be there. I mean, it's up to the board.
I agree with that. I'll motion to do that. I agree with that, Scott.
So
I agree.
Steve is making a motion that the board, the legislative report, as Mark put it together without revisions, should be passed by the board. Is there a second to that? Did I state that properly? You would like to have the legislative report submitted as Mark put it together without revisions. Is that right? Is there a second to that?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Mark, can you construct the vote somehow?
I can do a roll call vote. So I'll just quickly walk through our attendance list. And when I call out your name, please say aye if you approve of the motion, which as stated is to accept and approve the board report as it was put together in draft form, the first draft. Aye or nay. Dwight Collins?
Aye.
Derek Wall?
Aye.
Seth Iverson?
Eisenberg, is that?
Excuse
yeah,
me.
no problem. I think unless it's going to screw up our quorum, I'm going to abstain given it's for the activities of the prior year. So I'm going to abstain for the moment. Revisit that if it ends up putting us in a tough spot relative to the adoption.
Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
For them to move forward. Oh yeah, it's like, yeah, on that model, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Seth. Mr. Tomahawk.
Yes.
Jack Smith is not with us today. Lindsay Ball.
Aye.
Ted Simon.
Abstain.
Is that acceptable to you, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Chuck Pavlik.
No.
Scott Starkey.
No.
Steve Jacobs.
Yes.
Pete Grundeck.
Aye.
Travis Mackey.
Aye.
And I believe that is all the voting members we have present. Carrie, were you taking account of votes?
I wasn't sure if Seth ended up abstaining or saying yes.
I believe he abstained.
Okay. So we have seven yeses and 2 noes, 2 abstain, 3 abstains. So
Mr.
passed.
I believe the motion passes.
Yeah. Is there any further discussion by the minority? I'll have a little discussion then. I think we can take up the discussion about incubation boxes. I think we should in the next meeting look at all the science that is out there and discuss it further. And so the legislative report going on without it is fine with me. We need to get that report out. So I'm very comfortable with it. Is any further discussion?
Yes.
The minority.
Scott, I'd like to propose, since there is quite a lot of science out there about the incubation boxes, this might be an appropriate topic for an OHRC workshop.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Good idea.
With that, sounds like a 7-4 vote that motion passes to submit the legislative report without the revisions. Okay.
I'm confused on the number. What? 7-4? Is that the actual numbers?
I've got 2 abstain, 2 no, and 7 yes.
2 abstain.
Okay.
7.
For that. Okay, that motion is passed. Next item is a legislative session update. Is Sean Clements here? Are you going to do that?
Sure, yeah. So legislation closed on Friday for another year. There was several bills that passed that impacted ODFW. The first one being the end of session funding bill, HB 5202, and that included funds for ODFW in a drought package for our Oregon Conservation Rec Fund, which is a granting program, 8 million for fish passage and 2.6 million for temperature and flow monitoring, as well as $7 million to ODOT for funding wildlife crossings and habitat connectivity. So a fairly big package there that we've got to put on the ground in the next year. There was also Senate Bill 1501 and 1502, which you might have heard as the Private Forest Accord, an agreement between conservation interests and timber industry about how to modify the Forest Practices Act. Both of those bills passed, and for ODFW, that creates additional responsibilities around stream typing, stream perenniality, beaver management, road crossings, and then also creates an additional mitigation fund within our Oregon Conservation Rec Fund to the tune of $15 million a year for up to the next 50 years. So that was a really big bill that we're going to be working on implementing over the next few years here. And then there was Senate Bill, where is it? 4055, which is also related to the harvest tax portion of the PFA that's going into the Conservation and Rec Fund. And what else? 4072 was a House bill that was originally related to giving our commission the authority to reduce license fees for the purposes of promotion, as well as reducing our combined angling and crabbing license and combining that into one and offering it at a lower price of just a one-day angling license. With the passage of the Rogue South Coast plan late last year, there was also a need to adopt some additional validations and fees for that plan to pay for monitoring. And so that was added to this bill this session, and the bill was passed, which essentially creates 2 new validations in the Rogue South Coast area fishing for winter steelhead and reduces the combined cost of a one-day angling and crabbing for shellfish license. And then there was also one House Bill 4128, which is on control and prevention of zoonotic disease, which is essentially directing us to work with DAS on a report about the potential for zoonotic diseases in Oregon. Those were the ones that passed. So happy to take any questions.
What were the ones that didn't pass?
That related to fish and wildlife? Otherwise, it's a pretty big list.
Yeah, related to fish and wildlife.
There was Senate Bill 1534, which is state policy to increase carbon sequestration in natural and working lands and waters. That didn't pass. There was 4060, which was stuff that would have gone into ODOT to help coordinate federal funding for natural resource agencies around IIJA, the infrastructure package. There was 4080, which authorizes formation of a predator damage control district. 4127, which established a $1 million general fund for wolf management compensation. 4130, which appropriates $7 million to general fund for ODOT to promote safe road crossings for wildlife. 4145, which requires ODFW to create a fish incubation box program in coastal areas of Southern Oregon and appropriates some general fund for research there. And then 4148, which was a salmon credit program to encourage voluntary restoration of salmon habitat.
Oh, not too bad.
That one didn't pass, huh? I thought that one would go through. That salmon credit program.
Yeah, I thought that was a good bill.
Wasn't there 47? Yeah. Wasn't there 4072, something about a day angling license that the charters wanted?
Yeah, that's the one I mentioned that passed with the Rogue South Coast validations in it.
Oh, sorry, I missed that. Yeah, good.
Yeah, so now you can get a one-day license that includes a shellfish license.
Are there any questions for Sean? Okay, thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Next item is the ODFW and OHRC budget update. Mark?
Right. Thank you, Scott. And I think we're running a little behind here, so I'm going to go as quickly as possible. I'll just share my screen, hoping you can all see that now. There, should be able to see that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, good. So revenue for last quarter came in at $86,689. This is close to the same amount recorded for the same quarter in the previous year. both this year and last year. That quarter was significantly up from the previous year back in 2019. So this is these revenue is cyclical, and so we're about where we might expect to be for this quarter. Let's see. Move to spending here. OHRC research spending came in on average just over $50,000 per month by our current OHRC research projects, those led by
Mark, just for clarification, this research spending, is this from the House Bill 3012 money, or is this the whole, the whole operational costs of OHRC?
This is associated with the dedicated research fund, which I believe you're referring to.
Thank you.
And so that came in at about $50,000 across those each month for the past 3 months of November, December, and January. I haven't yet received an invoice for February. I expect to see that soon. Those 3 months were actually pulled together in a single invoice, which is why I have them averaged across those 3 months. Mr. Chair, you asked me for an update on spending by each of the 3 projects.
Yes.
That is depicted here. So the orange bars indicate total allocation since inception of each project, and the yellow bars indicate spending through January of this year. So as you can see and would expect, spending has not exceeded total commitment. Any questions there?
Oh, the amount spent, that's what's been spent since the inception on each project?
Correct.
Not that much.
And the allocation is how much we've allocated to those projects so far, and that we would have to agree to continue beyond that orange. Is that right?
This board has approved total spending to those amounts.
To the
Right.
amounts you have in allocation.
Hey, Mark, quick question. Any variances you saw to completion schedule that, basically track off either based on milestones or date that worry you relative to being able to complete the project that, it's inside the allocated budget?
No, I wouldn't say that we see that. We'll be having updates by all the researchers that are going to cover their progress to date relative to the flow chart and project proposals. So those updates will speak exactly to that question.
Perfect.
Mark, could you put a date on the allocation? When that, what date that allocation
runs through the bottom left corner there. The allocation that has been approved runs through June 30, 2023.
June 30, 2022? Is that right?
23. Allocation runs through the end of this biennium, which is closes on June 30th, 2023. Later today, I'll revisit the funding cycle and where I proposed June of last year that the board would have some decision points to review and approve proposals for funding that would fit. As you've done each, this board has approved research projects on a biennial cycle, and I expect that would continue. You're still in the midst of reviewing proposals that might be approved for for funding, which is my next slide. So at our December meeting, rather, this board voted and approved funding for Dr. Blumen's research, funding it through the end of this current biennium, which, as I mentioned, ends June 30th of 2023. ODFW has a forecast revenue of about $1 million. So given current commitments that have been approved by the board of $855,000, $8,551,881, there's remaining just over $144,000 surplus projected revenue that could be allocated to additional research. And that could be, I'll be talking about this later, that could go to support research, including those proposals that you've seen
here on the computer.
I believe we've got,
OHRC. Can you call me back?
okay. So there is a surplus that needs or could yet be allocated to research, including those that were proposed last fall. And we'll be talking about that, I hope, later today.
What was that number, Mark? That we have a surplus? How much was that?
144,000 and change.
124.
Based on a forecast of revenue.
Mm-hmm.
So it might be a little more or a little less than that we actually end up having, and we try not to go into the red. Of course, we do have a little bit of buffer around that number, though.
Okay.
So unless there are more questions, that's my budget report for today.
So we've spent year to date on the projects something around, I don't know, I didn't get the number exactly, something around 4.3 million or something like that we've spent already. And we were projected over the long run to spend,
I believe it's about 12.
15. Yeah. Okay.
So we're per the large schedule, we're quite underspent. There were some adjustments, of course, based on revenue, which didn't come in at 1.2 million as we expected it. It dropped down a bit, but now it's coming back up. But given those adjustments, we're significantly underspent on the initial projections.
Okay, does anybody have any questions about the budget and where we are? Mark, could you send the report you put up on the screen there? Could you send us a copy of that?
I sure could. Yeah.
Thank you. If there's no further questions, then we're ready to move on to the update on the research projects. I'd like to preface that for just a minute. These are our three key research projects that are funded by that House Bill 3012 money. And these are the projects that we're supposed to be tracking very carefully. You have, I think you all maybe not the new members, but you might have got these flow charts that were sent out that have some check spots where the scientists are supposed to report back to the board, and there's questions to be asked of, does it make sense to go forward to this, or is it going to produce what we want, or if not, do we change? So we can, with these projects, it's up to the board to take a look at them. And we have, when these projects were set up, we agreed that they were long-term projects, 12 to 15 years. We found funding to carry them all the way through. But there were points that came up with something like, just for an example, on the honing, we wanted to find a chemical to put in the water that would bring, that was non-toxic, it was affordable. You could put economically affordable, practical. You could put it in the water and attract fish to return. And we wanted to put checks in there because if everything worked, we found the chemical, we found something that was non-toxic, it was affordable, we would continue with the project. But if we didn't, if at some point the researcher said, hey, we just can't find a chemical, the chemical we find that works costs $100,000 an ounce, and that's not practical. So let's turn this research around and do something difficult with it. Maybe keep funding it, but let's maybe change the direction. So that's what we kind of need to look at. Are these projects headed the way we want? Are we going to end up with a practical, economical application to improve hatchery returns, which is what the people are looking at funding? Hatchery returns or restoring harvestable fish abundance. And if these projects are not headed that way, it doesn't look like we have that outcome. How could the project possibly be altered or change direction a little bit to get to that goal? And then we look, the kind of stop loss points if it's not going the right direction. So keep that in mind when these are being reviewed. One more point, Michael Banks. I'm sorry I missed your call yesterday. I'll give you a call after this or sometime this afternoon. I was up on the mountain with my excavator playing around yesterday and I didn't have any phone connection. So with that, if there's no questions of how I started out with this, I'd like to turn it over to Michael Banks, the research update on the salmon mate selection.
So thank you. Do you hear me clearly?
Excuse me?
Are you hearing me clearly?
Yes.
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 I just wanted to start off by welcoming the new members and thanking the board for your engagement and interest in our research. I find it a tremendous privilege to have this opportunity. And I also want to especially welcome Sean, who's a long-held colleague, as our new director, and to thank Mark for the tremendous service you have put in guiding us through the interim of directorship. So just want to say that as start out. And yeah, I'm very excited to share with you today because I think I have very good news for you in terms of our project. Let me get it going. Do you see my first slide clearly here?
Yep.
Let's see. Yep. I have subtitles that I don't want. Okay. So, of course, this is what the talk is. And as we see from the female over there, things are looking good so far. I will share with you in 5 main highlights from this last year. First of all, as you've seen from returns to our own hatchery there on Fall Creek, the return of Oregon coho was very strong this year. This last year was also the 3rd year of our wildlife versus random experimental spawn at Sandy Hatchery, which we did on November the 3rd. It was also the 1st year that the jack returns to the hatchery were from our experiment back in 2019. And there were a lot of them. It's wonderful. It's also been a boon year in terms of our peer review approval. And Ted, I remember at your last meeting, you encouraged us to go out and spread our good work to the masses. And I think we've done pretty well. This year, I believe I've shared these with you as well. Those are pretty international and top-class publishing venues. And then lastly, I'd like to talk to you about an innovation that I am forwarding, and it's one of the proposals that you have been reviewing as well. So this is now well known to you. Tremendous that coho returns have been so good. And actually, in terms of our hatchery, I work a lot with them, and Ryan Queen, the manager there, informed me there would probably be 7,000 coming back this last year, and the number was even greater than that, 7,200. So that's all very good. And now I'd like to just overview, apologies for those who have just joined, but many of the other board know our experiment very well, and I'm just going to overview it briefly here now. This was the setup early morning on November 3rd. This is actually a bioinformatician from OSU's Center for Quantitative Life Sciences, who worked with me to develop a program to help us efficiently choose wildlife mates for the individuals that came up. This is Ryan in the background here. He's the manager of the hatchery. This is my lab manager, Dave, and I think that's either Jack or Charles, another hatchery member there. We're just setting up in the early morning. This over here is my computer. I'm about to sit down and help with defining which mates should be combined. And here is a tray of females lined up with their chosen males. And I just want to draw your attention here. Look at these two fine jacks. They were not chosen by their size or look, they were chosen by their genes. And their genes seem to collaborate with more of what our traditional thoughts are as good mates. This is actually in process now. This is Charles dividing the eggs from a single female into two halves. One half bred with a randomly chosen male, as is typical in hatcheries, and the other half bred with our wildlife selected mate, as depicted with the program and through all the genomic analysis that we've done on the broodstock. And we actually bred just over 100 families and created 300,000 eggs that were then put into egg boxes. So in summary, in terms of our activities, we bred 107 females, combining them with twice that number of males, creating 214 half-sib families. The early egg mortality was a little higher than usual, Ryan told me, but not serious. He indicated that he had a similar egg mortality in our 2019 spawn. 2020 was more typical, but it was not serious. And actually, 212,000 juveniles were ponded February the 8th. And I visited them 2 weeks ago. They seem to be doing fine. I watched them being fed and they're looking great. So that was tremendous. They will be coded white tag marked the first week of May, and they will be released in a year's time. So that's the news of the experimental spawn. I just wanted to review why could mate choice and why and how could mate choice improve fitness of hatchery fish. This is a slide that I took from a previous presentation to you. It's well established that contemporary hatchery fish have about half the fitness of their wild counterparts should they spawn in the wild. That's demonstrated in 4 different species of salmon and covered in a review by Mark Christie, 2016, and also our own study with Coho on the Umpqua. So there's scope basically to double the fitness of hatchery fish if we could make them more like their wild counterparts. And it's more than just adding numbers of fish to the fishery. Hatchery fish could thrive and reproduce as effectively as wild fish, reducing or canceling their drawdown risks should they mate with wild fish in the wild. So that's the major justification. Now I'm excited to share with you our first preliminary results because the jacks that returned there were the first outcome of our approach where, as you may remember, we divide the egg of each female, mating half of them with a wildlife mate, chosen mate, and the other half with a random chosen mate, as is typical in hatcheries. As I told you already, there were many of them. There's 1,300. Just working with the numbers, you also heard that there was a good return to the Oregon hatchery, to Fall Creek, basically. That was 71 jacks out of 1,065 total, that was a 7%. This number, 1,300 out of a total of 7,200, is an 18%. So 3 times the amount as a comparison with Fall Creek. Ryan also indicated, and I didn't solicit this comment from it, it just came while we were spawning. He said, wow, these jacks appear a little larger than usual. So this is actually now the genetic result for the first 90 jacks. 31 of them were unresolved, so the new total that we have is 59. 37 of them were from mate choice directed males, and 22 from the random. So our comparison, and this is very preliminary, this is just the very first result, but wonderful, as we predicted. So 63 versus 37, not quite double, but approaching. That's why I was so excited to share with you today. And of course, we need to look at the other 1,210. The libraries for those were submitted for sequencing just last week. So I should be getting those results soon, and I will be sure to let you know as soon as I feel positive and yeah, as soon as we can share them with you. So I guess I just wanted to say, thanks to your support and our experiments, which began in 2019, really at the hatchery, and followed in 20, and then just this last year, we have created just over 1 million coho. 500,000 of them are random bred, as typical in hatcheries, and 500,000 of them were bred with our genomic selected chosen mate. Of course, many of them are still rearing, and some of them are still out in the ocean. And I just wanted to put in a bid that you continue supporting this project, because we do not need that much more time or money, but this is a tremendous investment where we can actually see if we can support a result like I show you here, we may be having a very big impact on the way things are done in the future towards greater survival of hatchery fish. So Scott, I hope you're happy. You always have been asking for where the numbers, and here are some numbers that I'm finally able to give you. And I'm very excited to share that with you.
Good.
Our work, of course, you know, I guess I wanted to explain, you know, when you go to a doctor, you want to be sure that your doctor is well trained and accepted by his peers. And the same exists in science. We have to get all our work, put it before our peers, and they have a close scrutiny on that work. And I just wanted to share that. I think that side of the story is going well for us too. You, of course, I think it was about 6 months ago, I shared this paper from Integrative Organismal Biology. The primary work that we use and provides us information to select mates is in that paper. That work was chosen, you know, I actually just received an email and a call from this international magazine wanting to write a story on that study, and I believe I've shared that with you too. And of course, I do other research, and I wanted to share with you findings from that as well, because it relates to the other side of life of salmon. Beyond when they leave hatcheries, they spend 3/4 of their time in the ocean, and how they navigate in that ocean, of course, is important for their survival and vitality. And we just were able to get this paper out in a top-class journal, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, on magnetite in their noses as information and a technique that they use for navigation in the ocean. So lastly, I wanted to share with you a new innovation that we are forwarding, and this is a proposal that you have in your current review. Some of you may know this technology you see on the right-hand side here, Northwest Marine Technologies product that is currently used in most hatcheries to read those fish that have coded white tags within them. Because of my interest to actually sample all of the returns next year, this year and the year following, and how much work it was and how hard it was to sample those 13,000 jacks by hand, I'm interested in automating DNA sampling in hatcheries. And I've actually began a class because OSU is keen on supporting faculty that have innovations that they would like to take into enterprise, basically. So I'm taking OSU Advantage, Iterate, and Accelerate. And that's why I called you, Scott, and I will be calling others of you because my class requires that I interview stakeholders for this innovation. So basically, our technology we are calling a fast sorter and tagger for hatcheries, but also state and federal managers and even in the market. It's going to provide precise AID and close error bars and estimates to guarantee better sustainability of fisheries management. We're hoping to overcome the tedious sampling of DNA by hand by combining coded wire tag reading and DNA sampling within a similar technology to what you see over here. Of course, every fish has DNA, so we won't have to deal with the 20% limitation of coded wire tagging and have much better estimates that we get from this kind of information. You guys haven't decided whether you want to support this project yet, and I really need this sampler in November this year, so I'm pursuing other funding mechanisms as well, and I'm preparing a proposal for NSF's small business innovation opportunity as well. So you asked us to also share a little bit, and of course, I wanted to share that we have a tremendous multi-million-dollar innovation lab right here where I work, where I hope to basically realize this gain. We have an engineer in there that I'm collaborating with on these grants and hopefully able to bring that into fruition.
Yeah.
So I think I just got 2 more slides. I know we're time. These were your flowcharts, Scott, and just to review, this is now all done, but our first 3 years were developing the genomics that we used for mating these fish, as you just have seen, and then actually an assay technique. So these are all done. Those 3 papers that I just showed you are part of the outcome there. We developed a GT-seq assay that we have now applied. And in addition, we have done phase 1 for Chinook, and the multifaceted choice that we actually use to efficiently choose mates in the hatchery is also an anticipated product that we have produced. So that's all done. And this is the phase 3 of our project, which I originally suggested would take 12 years. The 3 spawns are complete. Now what's outstanding is to verify the wildlife mating advantage over the next 3 years. So I estimate that we will need to continue till 225. That is not doing the 2nd generation that was suggested here in the original proposal, but of course would halve that time. So that's where I'm at. Happy to answer questions.
Yeah, Michael, I had a question. Could you generally describe to me how you determine what fish to combine for mate choice? You know, you have genetic profiles that you match, but how does that work, or how do you know what to match, or what's that base? I never could follow understand what that's based on.
Yeah, so it's based on the study that happened on the Umpqua, where every fish was captured as they returned to a weir. And because of prior setup, we knew which ones of those fish were wild and which ones of those fish had hatchery origin. So we fin clipped all those fish, and then we let them go above the weir into a natural system where they could choose their mates and form reds and basically let life happen. This was a 10-year study. Those offspring from those different matings then went out into the ocean as is typical. And then we continued to sample the returns at that weir over 10 years and do DNA studies on them. So we basically could work out who mated with who and determine how many offspring returned from each of the matings. That's where our original information about how, at least in our study, on average, the wild by wild matings had many more offspring than the hatchery by hatchery matings. Now, with this study and with your support, we went back and did a full genome study of those male and female wild fish that had highly productive matings, and looked at 15,000 different genes to determine which ones of those genes correlated with greater survival. And we came up with a panel of about 1,000 genes, and we then looked at which ones of them were more, or had greater statistical support for evidence for greater survival. And that's what we use now. We basically try and match those hatchery fish in ways they would have matched to correlate with what we observed among those highly productive wild fish. It's kind of complicated, and I'm going to ask you for your. I think I have your phone number on the board list there. I'll give you a phone call, and we can have a longer conversation about this.
Okay. Yeah. So you just basically look at the males and look for some genes in the males, and if they have those genes that were successful, you found in that previous study, those are the candidates for your fathers for the families you're talking about.
Yes, what we do is we go up to Sandy 2 weeks before spawning date, and we basically fin clip and tag 200 females and 400 males. And we come home and we genotype them, and then on the spawning day, we bring up the first 10 females, and we use the computer to basically look up their genotypes. And we bring up 15 females, and we ask the computer to try as best as possible emulate wild-like spawning strategies among those combinations. And that's how we basically form pairs that are mated there. So we're basically trying to emulate how hatchery fish combine, being guided by what we observe in a wild natural system as highly productive wild-like matings. And it seems to be working so far. Those halves of the eggs that come back in greater number is a pretty tight experiment. It's the same female. So there's no other confounding factor. It's the same female. If we get more from the half that we combine with a mate choice selected mate, then it seems to work. And I'm very keen to see how that is supported by ongoing results. Next year, the adults returning will be from that first experiment, and the following 2 years, we will have the whole thing replicated over 3 years, which will be neat because the ocean varies and conditions vary. And of course, this will be under extreme scrutiny if we're going to change the way hatcheries operate. They want to know that we're absolutely sure about the outcome.
And your measure of success is hatchery returns, the relative rate of hatchery returns between the two treatment groups.
Yes.
I'm curious about that also because I just reviewed the research plan that came out when this thing first started, and at that point you mentioned that you were going to use releases into the wild and look at pedigree studies as far as wild survival in a natural environment, but that we're not doing that, correct? We're looking at just hatchery returns.
No, and I actually consulted a lot with ODFW about extending this project into Sandy River to be able to compare the returns to the wild system. It's apparently a very flashy system. The amount of hatchery escapement is very low, and so it would be incredibly expensive and tedious to actually do that in that system. So yes, you are right. I originally suggested that that could be done, but it's not been feasible in this current situation and with where things are at right now.
I understand the challenges of doing that. Just that if you want to look at, are these fish more fit to be colonize natural habitat and interact with wild natural populations? We're not quite getting it. We're looking at purely survival in a hatchery system here.
Well, yeah, but also, I mean, in terms of, you know, considering all the stakeholders, if we can create a more fit hatchery fish, then they're going to be more present at all stages in the life cycle. They will make greater contribution to the ocean fishery and the river fishery as well.
No question about that. But it still leaves the question as to what impact they would have on natural populations.
Absolutely. But I guess, and you know, this is a very controversial issue, but if they are just as fit as wild fish, then how could they have an impact? I mean, currently the impact is that they reduce, you know, it's believed that they reduce, if they mate with a wild fish, they'll reduce the fitness of the offspring of those wild fish. Well, if they are just as fit as a wild fish, then they may not do that.
Perhaps, but if, like Michael Blue and stuff, if just a one, you know, generation of rearing and hatchery causes, it could be the genetics and also the environmental effect of the hatchery rearing.
Yes. Yeah.
Michael, I have a question. Where do you take the DNA sample? How do you take the DNA sample? Where does it come from?
A little fin snip out of the caudal fin. And the innovation that I was describing at the end there, I proposed to use a camera to size up the fish inside that coded wire reading tunnel, and then you know, focus a plunger to basically take a little 3 millimeter punch out of the caudal fin of each sample.
I'm not a scientist, but I'm just wondering if can you get that genetic sample from egg and sperm?
Yes. One can get DNA from any tissue.
I'm just wondering.
But isn't the assay that you have set up based on somatic DNA though? I mean, you're looking at, you know, can you actually do the stuff that you're doing for your assays on haploid DNA?
No, I was just about to mention that the issue is that you know, with eggs, there's a ploidy question before they fertilize that needs to be overcome.
Actually, the egg is still diploid until it's fertilized.
Yeah.
And the second polar buffer.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Oh, that's why that's how they were able to induce triploidy, and that's interesting. And I'm gonna have to brush up on my genetics now. Nice.
So you couldn't get the sample. Let's say if you collected eggs and you could hold those eggs for a while, and you could collect the sperm and you hold that for a while, then you could be making your selection while holding that instead of having to hold the fish right there. But that doesn't work. Is that what you're telling me?
There's an issue. Yeah, there's a ploidy issue with the eggs that Carl just mentioned. So it would be better just to take a piece of fin from the male and the female.
You also can't hold the gametes very long.
Well, they do at Scott is very familiar with a program on the Coos that they actually hold the gametes for a day until they fertilize them a day later, right, Scott?
Yeah, but what I'm talking about is you could hold the adults for weeks.
Here.
Do your technology.
This is a great discussion, but I'd like to call the board's attention to the hour. It seems we're running about 30 minutes behind, and we've got a couple more, at least a couple more presentations. It seems there might be a decision to be made by the board whether or not to run later into the afternoon with this meeting.
Well, why don't we just move on to the next report and see how we do getting our way through? We are some behind. 7:25, yeah. We're about 30 minutes behind.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be, I think, wise to move along, but I also don't see possibility of catching up. So is the board prepared to continue beyond the 11:50 hour today?
I can make a motion to extend the meeting till 12:30. I don't know, I guess we could take a vote on it and that'll tell us how many people can actually do it. So move to extend the meeting to 12:30 termination.
Second.
I'd second it.
Any opposed?
The motion made and to extend the meeting to 12:30. It's been seconded. All in favor? Or if there's no objections, will motion be passed? Is there any objections? Okay, motion passed. We'll continue till 12:30. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we're ready. If there's no more questions for Michael Banks, we're ready for Michael Bluen and the hatchery domestication.
All right, great, thanks. And yeah, I'll echo Michael's appreciations for the board and welcome to the new members. I'm actually really looking forward to having meetings out at the OHRC again so we can chat in the in the between lunch period. I kind of missed that. And also thanks to Mark, who's done an amazing job stepping into this interim chair role on basically zero notice. And also welcome to Sean. I hope it all works out. Really looking forward to having him as a colleague here close by. So yeah, thanks to all of you. So let me go ahead and pull my screen up and tell you what we've been up to. Let me go into full screen mode here. All right, and pull these controls over here. All right, very good. So yeah, so I just want to give a quick little background of the study because I know not everybody has seen it before. So again, the problem we're addressing here is this huge pile of data going back 15 years that shows that hatchery fish adapt to hatcheries really fast. And it is known to be a genetic effect, and it's very good data showing that it's actually owing to adaptation to the hatchery in ways that make the fish, for some reason, less well adapted to the wild. In other words, their ability to produce surviving, returning offspring is reduced. And so the conundrum that causes for managers is they have to manage the number of hatchery fish on the spawning grounds. Because of their dual roles as supporting the fishery and also having to manage wild populations. And so really you're left with two possible solutions to this problem. Is one, you can figure out how to segregate hatchery fish that are returning. Ideally, we would just catch them all, but that's difficult and impractical in some places. Alternately, if one could figure out what's going on genetically and basically evolutionarily in hatcheries and change it, then you could create hatchery fish that are more like wild fish and freely release more of them. And that would pretty much solve everybody's problems, kind of like Michael was saying at the end of the discussion there. And so that is the problem that we've chosen to tackle, is to try to figure out what can you change about the hatchery to make hatchery fish more like wild. And again, this is a genetics and evolution problem. And so what we need to figure out is what's under selection and what can we change about the hatchery to reduce those selection pressures. And the whole premise of our work follows from this. Oh, and I'll also point out that what we're doing is basically directly focused on the first two parts of the OHRC mission statement: understand mechanisms that create differences between hatchery and wild fish, and develop approaches to manage that difference. So, okay, here's basically the whole premise.
Hey, Mike.
Of our work. Yeah.
This is Kathleen here. Which slide number are you on?
Looks like number 3. Are y'all? Am I not?
Yeah, you're not in presentation
No,
mode, so
it's-
we're still on the title slide.
Oh, you're kidding me. All right.
No.
Thank you for pointing that out. All right. What do you see now? What do you see now, Kathleen?
Not presentation
Still
mode,
same. Yeah.
Let me.
just on the bottom right. Yep, there you go.
There you go, that
You're
one.
good.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, I was in presentation mode, but y'all weren't seeing it. Are you seeing it now?
No.
No.
That's very strange. It's probably because I have 2 different screens going on here. Let me try a new share again. Stop share. Let me fire this thing up again. That's funny. I've been talking all this time and you guys couldn't see the slides.
We saw one of them.
Okay, what do you see now?
There you
That's
go.
better.
Presentation mode, some little fish.
Yeah, yes.
All right.
Yep.
All right, fantastic. Okay. So did I just change slides?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
You're there. Yeah.
All right. So this is what I was laying out the problem. Okay, your hatchery fish, we know they adapt really fast to hatcheries. It's been shown it happens in a single generation, even using wild broodstock. So that creates a huge problem for managers. They have to basically hold back the number of fish they release. If we can make our hatchery fish more like wild, it solves everybody's problem. So, and then I was pointing out that this research is directly focused on the first 2 parts of the OHRC mission: understand the mechanisms and develop approaches to manage the problem. And so the premise of all our work is based on a couple observations. One, there's a huge pile of data showing that when you release hatchery fish, the larger smolts are more likely to return. There's very strong selection after release on size at release. The other thing we know is that when you raise multiple different families under hatchery conditions, there's a huge effect of family on how large they are at the end of the experiment. So we've done tons of these experiments where you create a large number of families in the hatchery, you raise them under hatchery conditions, and family identity typically explains like often over 50% of the variance in size at the end of the experiment. It depends on whether you raise them all the way to smolting or stop after 6 months, but there's a huge family effect. And so this means that because of the survival at sea being correlated with size, that selection favors families having certain traits that allow them to grow fast in the hatchery. We don't entirely know what these traits are, but almost certainly aspects of behavior, probably physiological. So we suspect that families that are favored in the hatchery are those that perhaps have bolder behaviors. They feed more readily, particularly early in development, right at the stage at which freshly hatched fry are being trained to feed in troughs. And we've actually done a bunch of experiments measuring, for example, components of boldness among different families and how that predicts their growth rate. I won't talk about any of that today because we have a short presentation. But here's the rub: is apparently the genes that are favored in the hatchery are not necessarily favored in the wild, so that when those surviving adults come back, they spawn in the wild and then their offspring don't survive. And that is why we see reduced fitness on the part of the hatchery adults. So that is the premise upon which we're working. And it's not difficult to think about all the ways that this environment on the left is different from this one on the right. But you might think, okay, well, why is selection for fast growth, why is that bad? Well, it's not. But here's the thing: is in the wild, you have a trade-off between growth and survival. Whereas in the hatchery, pretty much it's just about maximizing growth, pedal to the metal, no consequences. So the variation among traits such as behavior or physiology that allow you to eat a lot and grow fast in this environment on the left is probably very different than over here on the right, where you have very low food abundance, you have to hide from predators, you have to establish a territory. So the behaviors that make you grow fast and do well in a hatchery probably get you eaten out here. So that's where we believe the trade-off comes in. So what we want is to come up with a way for the gene pool that goes into the hatchery to be pretty much the same as the gene pool that comes out the back end. Then you have no selection. And as a test of this hypothesis about what's going on, we did an experiment recently, which we just published last year. We created a number of full sib families, 19 that had first generation hatchery fish. That is, their parents were wild. And then we created 19 families created using 2 wild hatchery fish. Pooled all the families together, raised them in multiple tanks at the Aquatic Animal Health Lab at OSU. And we also took the same pooled siblings and put them in the artificial streams. And what we found was, as predicted by our hypothesis, the HH families, they grew substantially faster under hatchery conditions, but had substantially lower survival in the streams. And the effect was really large in both directions. So this is actually quite a stunning result. In fact, we got a bunch of press about this last fall when our paper came out. In fact, Mark Johnson and I were on Jefferson Public Radio. Mark got a chance to talk about the OHRC, and I got a chance to talk about this project. So we're pretty sure this is what's going on. So what do you do about it? All right, what can you change about the hatchery to fix the problem? If we could reduce the variance in size at release, then there's no selection. So this is kind of the crux of the matter here. So what we're showing here is some made up graphs. On the x-axis is body size, and on the vertical, the y-axis is just frequency. And so what we see here is the frequency distributions of body size at release of 3 families, the green, red, and blue families. And under this environment, environment 1, which would be, say, the traditional hatchery environment, whatever it is about this green family, their behavior, their physiology, they grow really, really fast. And whatever it is about this blue family, not so much in that hatchery environment. So you have this huge spread in size at release, and what comes back from the ocean is going to be mainly the green family. So you've had very strong selection. Now, if we could alter the rearing environment such that they're all coming out at about the same size, or at least there's less spread, then when you release them, what comes back is a much more even distribution among families. So you've reduced your selection. So basically the gene pool coming back from the sea under environment 2 is a lot more like the gene pool that went into the hatchery than under environment 1. So that's what we're trying to achieve here. So again, this is the crux of the matter. So I hope I explained that well. So what we've been doing is a series of experiments to say, what can you alter about hatchery rearing environment that might reduce that size variation at the end of your experiment, at the end of the grow out period? And what we're doing is we're making assumptions about the types of traits that might be under selection. So for example, certain behavioral traits. We suspect that these kind of slow growing families, they're probably a little shyer, less ready to feed. Maybe they get dominated in the tank. Maybe physiologically their metabolism isn't ramped up, or they're not pre-adapted to handle the type of food they get, which is not very similar to what you see out in nature. So those are the type of things we think that if you vary those in a hatchery, you might be able to reduce that size variation at release, thereby reducing the amount of selection and domestication. So what I'm showing here is basically what we've been doing. It's a simplification of Scott Starkey's flow chart. What we've been doing over the last few years is we test an environmental condition, and what we've been focusing on are the things that have been tried before in hatcheries and are plausible things one could do in a hatchery. We test an environmental condition. These are experiments from beginning to end. By the time you type all the fish, do all the analysis, they're like 2-year experiments. So then we ask, did it substantially reduce the variation in size among families? If not, we go test the next environmental condition. In fact, these are kind of overlapping experiments. And if we do find an environmental condition, then what we're going to do is that does substantially reduce the variance in size relative to the control tanks. Then what we're going to do is propose doing this on a production scale to see if it's repeatable. And if you can, in fact, get the gene pool that's coming back from the seed to equal more similarly the gene pool that went into the hatchery. And so some of the things we've tried, and I'll just give you an example. Here's the first thing we tried, altering the density. We raised multiple families at high density, which is your traditional rearing densities, and 10-fold lower. And what this is showing is the average body size of each family at the end of the experiment. We did this experiment 2 years in a row. So for example, here's the average body size of the gray family under high density. Here it is under low density. And what you see is everybody was bigger under low density, but the spread among families is pretty similar to under high density. So this treatment did not have an appreciable effect on the variance among families. And the other thing that's interesting is, the other thing you see is that the families that are winners under high density tend to be winners under low density and vice versa. And this was repeatable across 2 years. So here the family effect was very strong. We were not able to overcome it by just reducing the density. Other things we've tried besides density are the feed delivery method. Under the hypothesis that when fish are young and learning to feed, that maybe having humans looming over the tank and feeding perhaps startles them, and it is the bolder fish that learn to feed more quickly. We tried an experiment with hand versus automated feeding. Same thing, no major effect. We tried a satiation feeding experiment in which instead of giving the same amount of food every day like in the control tanks, what we did was fed basically a week's worth of rations, a little bit each day until it was all gone. And then they had to wait until the next week to get fed again. The idea here is that if you basically satiate the bolder fish, then perhaps the smaller, shyer ones that are being dominated, perhaps then they will get more food. That did not have an appreciable effect. The other thing we've tried is altering the feed composition, because hatchery feed is very high in fat relative to a wild diet. And so we thought, well, maybe there's a physiological component to this, that the families that do well are the ones that can handle this high fat diet and turn it into body mass more quickly. So we did controls were standard diet, and the treatment was a reduced fat diet. Again, same similar result as in the previous graph. So we've tried a number of things, none of which were able to appreciably influence that very strong family effect. Coming up this field season, we're doing a couple of experiments. This is my new graduate student, Mimi, who Jen was talking about. She's great, and she's going to be running these experiments. We're going to do a recirculating water experiment where basically you make the fish swim constantly at about a body and a half length per second. The idea here is that once you get fish swimming, they perhaps will set up fewer territories. They tend to school rather than fight. You tend to get better fin conditions, that sort of thing. And maybe that will favor the shyer fish in that circumstance. The other thing is an enriched environment. We're going to take these structures that the Surrogate Project pioneered and have been using at the OHRC and put these in the tank, again, giving fish places to hide, perhaps again, giving the shyer fish more of an environment in which they feel comfortable feeding and growing. So these are our two main experiments that Mimi's going to be running. The other thing we're gonna do is a pilot study experimenting with just brute force grading the fish. We're gonna raise them partway through the growth period, and then we're gonna sort them into large fish and little fish. And we're gonna try to hold back the big fish and overfeed and pump up the little fish and see if we can even out their size distributions. This is, like I said, a pilot study because there are a number of factors we have to play with here that we don't know what's going to be most effective. When do you do this grading? Are the little fish actually going to keep up? Are they just going to stratify into another broad size distribution again? So what we hope to do is a pilot study this year on grading, and then set up a formal experiment next year, perhaps in at a hatchery production scale if we can do it. Because again, grading is something that is not totally foreign for hatcheries. And so these are the experiments we've did. We've also actually had a number of years in which we set up experiments that were wiped out by disease, but at least we have the data we've collected so far. So really, the question is, what are the prospects for success here? On the one hand, on the left, you've got your traditional hatchery environment. ODFW and other people who run hatcheries are extremely good at raising fish to release and get fish to return for harvest, yet the fish adapt really quickly in ways we don't understand. So what are we going to have to modify about the hatchery? And the question is, do we basically go to raising them in artificial streams? At that point, you probably would get fish that are like wild fish, but you've lost the essentially production value of the hatchery, which is protecting those fish through the high mortality stage of the life cycle. So our hope is that somewhere in between, basically raising them in artificial streams and changing nothing, there is some sweet spot. And we don't know how aggressive the manipulation is going to have to be to achieve that. But we hope in these series of experiments, will find that spot. And at the end of the day, it's also possible that the answer is to overcome that family effect, you're going to have to make such a radical change to the hatchery that it's not worth it. But that's also useful information, because unless people do these experiments, you're not going to know that. And for example, once we go through these, then people will know, okay, well, that doesn't work. We won't try that in the future. So that's where we're going with this. We still hope that there's going to be some combination of environments, perhaps something very aggressive like grading and shuffling your fish several points during the grow out period is going to be what it takes. So with that, I will open for questions.
I had a quick question for you, Dr. Bloom. So on the primary research indicating kind of mitigating risk of outcrossing between hatchery fish that stray from hatcheries to be breeding with wild fish, I assume there's a pretty big body of primary research there. Is there anything you could direct me to as either a literature survey or any other sort of recent paper that kind of sums things up that I could take on? I don't know if other board members would be interested, but I'd love to get a piece of primary literature to try to absorb some of that.
So you're talking about straying in particular, or kind of the premise of this work that I was talking about?
The premise of the work, basically, where the hope is to improve fitness and reduce outcrossing effects. When those fish do end up spawning with wild fish.
Right. Well, there's a large literature on just the fitness of hatchery fish when they spawn in the wild, and there have been many studies, probably close to a dozen at this point, that pretty much all show the same thing, that on average hatchery fish produce fewer offspring when they spawn in the wild than do wild fish. And I can certainly direct you to that literature if you want to email me. That PLOS one.
Yeah, I'll send you a note.
Yeah, that PLOS one paper that I just cited. Let me go grab that real quick. That's actually a really good introduction. That bit pretty much lays out the hypothesis that I just went through. Let me see if I can.
Great.
These are the.
That'll be fine. We can do it offline. I'll follow up with you, and then I'll distribute it to the rest of the board just to kind of make it easy. So that's good.
Okay. All right. Very good.
Feet wet. Thank you.
Yeah, Mike, I had a question as far as your schedule. So you're going to continue another year of your treatments as far as different hatchery mitigation or rearing variations. Do you anticipate this, being the last go around on that, or potentially it could continue another year beyond this?
Yeah. So in this biennium, because of the nature of these experiments, they're basically 2-year experiments. Although we are this year, we're going to take them down. We're going to take them down early so we can get the results more quickly. So for this year, the circulating water system and adding structure to the tanks, we hope to have the answer to that at the end of this biennium, when the biennium ends June of 23, or at least that summer. We'll certainly be finishing analyzing up the data, because you set up these experiments in the winter, you run them through to the following winter. If you want to take them all the way to smolting, you got it through May. We're going to take them down, say, in January, February. Run the samples hopefully get some answers the following summer, just as the biennium is ending. So at that point, then we're also going to do this pilot study with the grading. And my hope is that maybe that type of aggressive manipulation is going to be the ticket, even if these smaller modifications to the environment don't have an appreciable effect. So at that point, then you can decide, do you want to take this further, or do you want to say that, okay, all the easy things you can try, like putting structure in tank or making them swim, those aren't going to have an appreciable effect. So that's a decision for the board to make. I actually think the grading might work. I think the devil's going to be in the details of when you do it, how you treat the large and small groups. And so, yeah, that would be the last thing I would want to try before I say, you know, all the easy things are unlikely to work, and you're going to have to do some much more aggressive intervention.
So barring any kind of catastrophic disease issue or whatever, or what, you know, we would have a decision point like a year from this upcoming June as far as the results of your work, you're saying?
Pretty much, yeah. Because of the timing of the experiment, I would hope that even if you decide to end this project, that you would allow us to continue, say, through the summer and fall, and at least wrap it up, because
right. I
the
understand
end
that.
of June is a really awkward time to end everything. So
okay, but we'd have, as far as the actual experimental work, it would go through the next June or so. Yeah.
Yeah, at least, yeah. 23.
Okay. And just I know this is really kind of looking way down the road, but you know the second stage was to do a pedigree study if you found a difference. Have you identified logistically where you might try something like that, or?
No, but I've talked to Scott and Mark about this, and you know, it depends on what we want to do, how many fish, and at that point, again, they assure me that it would be an ODFW's. If we have a treatment that they believe might actually work, it would be an ODFW's interest to set up an experiment to do that.
Yeah.
And you know, just because we can show it in, you know, 3 to 6 foot tanks under an experimental situation doesn't mean it would necessarily work in a hatchery production environment. And just to answer the initial question, you don't need to do a full two life cycle pedigree study. What you can do is, one, you can do your manipulation and just ask, you know, at the point you release them, did you reduce the variance in size among families? That doesn't take a long time. You release them, they come back, you ask, do you still have a more even distribution among families in what's coming back than amongst the control group? Again, that's like a 4-year experiment. All right. At that point, if you actually doing this in a place with a dam or a weir, you want to let them go upstream and prove it that at this point hatchery fish have the same fitness as wild, then again, you're looking at another 3 or 4 years for them to come back. But you have several checkpoints at the beginning where you can ask, does it appear to be working?
Right, but you're saying you wouldn't necessarily need a system, a closed system like that if you just want to look at returns. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. At the end of, so whatever the treatment is, let's say it's grading. You set up some raceways that are controlled, treated like usual, some raceways where you grade them, separate the large and small, feed the small extra. At that point, at release, you can ask, you know, what's the size distribution among families? Have you reduced it? Okay.
Yeah.
If you did, then great. Then you release them and you wait 3-4 years for them to come back and say and ask, does that distribution of number of fish per family, is it still more even than in the controls? If so, then you're doing great. And at that point, I think maybe that's something worth implementing.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Dr. Bloom.
No further questions.
Yeah, and by the way, y'all can call me Mike. You're so polite. Everybody calls me Dr. Bloom. So everybody else calls me Mike, all the students. So. I appreciate it, though.
All right.
There's a lot of detail and questions, but I'm sure you newer board members, if you're, or anyone, can can sign us a call, Michael Banks or Michael Bluen or Carl, and get some further detail on these things. So
Yeah,
it's hard to
absolutely.
cover
I
all
would
at
love
one
to
time.
communicate. Yeah, I would love to communicate with the new board members and point you to literature or whatever. So by all means, please reach out.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to the olfactory imprinting with Carl. I guess you're going to take care of that.
Yep, let me see if I can get the PowerPoint going here. Somehow. So when, very unfortunately, David passed away.
So Carl, just before you get too far into this, what you're showing us now is the presenter mode screen.
Oops. That's weird. Oh, I've lost my screen sharing, Mark.
Oh, no. Well, let's restore that. And no, it should still be there. You should still be able to do that. And then when you share your screen, choose the screen that is completely dominated by the first slide.
That's what I did.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to throw you off, but
from this view, how do I get back?
so you should be able to share your screen. There should be a button that says
yeah, there's not. That's what I'm missing.
Sometimes the easiest thing in this circumstance is to exit Zoom and come back in, and that'll reset your view.
Yeah, I did that.
No, I meant like you'd have to leave actually, and meaning leave and then click back in from the top. Well, I mean that's sort of the nuclear option, but it might be the most efficient at this point.
Before you do that though, Carl, I can remove your co-host permissions and then restore them, and maybe that'll make things work. Let's try that. Okay. Sorry, everyone. We'll try and have this sorted out here in just a second. Here we go. And now let's see if you have that option, Carl. You are co-host.
Can you see the PowerPoint now? Yeah, it's coming out really strange.
No.
I'm going to play the PowerPoint. I'm not doing anything, it's just doing it by itself. That's very strange. Sorry about this, Mark, and I worked through this yesterday and it worked just fine. I don't know what's going on here.
Carl, do you want to send me the file and I can put it up for you? We can try that.
We could try it. What's weird is that I can't get back to the Zoom meeting.
Try the escape key. You may have to. You may be in a autoplay mode and in presenter mode on the in the PowerPoint. So it may get you out of that window.
What I don't understand is why I can't get back to the Zoom meeting.
You are in the Zoom meeting.
Yeah, he's fine. I see him fine.
Yeah, I see nobody else.
I don't think you can see our windows, so I think that PowerPoint's dominating. You're taking over. So the other option is, are you on a PC? You can do Control-Alt-Delete, and you can kill PowerPoint as an app, and then it'll allow you to get back to your desktop.
Control-Alt-Delete.
Bring up the task manager. Control-Alt-Delete will bring up the task manager, and you can quit the PowerPoint app.
It's not working either.
Kill the process, and then okay, well.
Let me just close this all out and then come back in.
Yeah.
Maybe why I do this in
That
the
should work.
meantime, we have other projects that we need to talk about. And there's, I think 4 more proposals that were submitted, but were never considered by the board. And some sort of plan has to be made on how to do that. So why don't you guys tackle that while I try to get this going?
And that relates to our next agenda item. So that sounds like a good idea. Carl, we've got a couple of options here. One that I'll defer to the chair's decision, Scott. So please indicate which way you might like to direct the meeting. We could take public comment at this time. We could also begin the next agenda item after that, which would be a review of that process to solicit and review research proposals.
Let's discuss what we want to do with the reviewing the research projects that you got that came out of your workshop, and that we need to approve those. We need to spend a little time on each one, and we have some new members that should get a chance to review that. So I think we should have another special meeting, board meeting, to just address that issue, and we should do it as soon as possible within the next couple of weeks. One issue I know we have with Jack Smith's not on today because he's guiding, and he asked if the board would consider having meetings like at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening or something too, where he could have a better chance to get on. So that's up for suggestion, but maybe Mark, you could pick a time to have a special board meeting that would last probably just maybe an hour or two to discuss those projects and get approval on them, and send out a poll of a couple of times. And if we get enough people, we'll go ahead and do that sometime within the next couple of weeks.
Okay, well,
That would be
I think that may be a good direction to go, Scott. I'll maybe just say a few words to provide some background on process and where we're at that would take us to that decision point.
Okay.
Yeah, excellent.
Okay. So I'm going to attempt sharing my screen. I hope you can all see a picture of the OHRC and the date.
Yeah.
Is that clear
All
enough?
good.
Very good. Carl, you keep working there and let us know when you've got things, your PowerPoint up and running, and we'll switch back to you when you're ready.
I think I'm ready, Mark, whenever, but you can finish this up first.
Okay, great. I'll try and run through this and be sure to leave you with enough time. So here we have a slide that the board saw back in June of last year. And of course, this is good for our new members, Pete and Seth, to be able to see. Outlined here is the new process that we brought to the OHRC to solicit review and support research at the center. And, I'm pleased to say that we've been able to accomplish most everything we set out to do. The OHRC was able to host a virtual workshop, and we had over 35 participants from federal and state agencies, I believe 5 universities, tribal representation, NGOs came to this workshop and generated a list of research concepts, really. We then brought those concepts to the board. You rank them in order of priority, and then we issued a request for proposals in October. And from that request for proposals, we received 5. We had these then reviewed by peers in the field, really experts in salmon biology and research. And in December of last year, this board recommended support for one of those proposals, extending support for Dr. Bluen's research through the end of this biennium, which, as I mentioned earlier today, ends June 30th of 2023. We acted on your recommendation, we being ODFW and OSU, and work for Mike's research is now contracted. So those contracts are in place and functional. But as I mentioned earlier today, this leaves a positive balance with respect to expected or forecast revenue that could support research at the OHRC. And of course, this board is charged with soliciting and prioritizing research conducted at the center. So where are we now? Moving forward, I'm aware of at least a couple of options for you to consider. And there may be more. But one might be to distribute the reserve or distribute or reserve the remaining funds, that being about $150,000 to support small budget projects, these being projects under maybe $30,000. We could determine what that number is. And I have several of these proposals in hand. I sent one of them out to the board, and it was brought to all of our attention that it had not received the same level of peer review and scrutiny as the larger budget proposals, and the board should, I think, maybe make a decision as to whether or not they believe that small budget proposals should receive the same scrutiny as large budget proposals. Maybe they should. In that case, we need to kick that off. Another option might be to fund one of the 4 remaining proposals that the board received from the 2021 request for proposals. And I have them just briefly listed there. These are proposals by Peterson, Falsey, Cooch, and Banks, and the budgets are listed there in order. So as you can see, at least a couple of those might exceed what our expected revenue surplus. So we'd either need to circle back to those researchers and see if some adjustment might be made if one of those is highest priority as deemed by this board. Other options might be to let that balance carry forward or support, provide some research support to the incoming director. Of course, that would require a proposal of sorts too. And there might be other options. So if the board is today prepared to make a decision on one of the 4 remaining proposals that you received in the fall, I think that would be great. If you would like to take another direction to decide upon how these funds might be spent, I think at the very least, I would encourage the board to decide upon a course of action. The last slide I have here is sort of the cycle where we're at. And so last year we were able to get proposals in the fall. I don't know, I hope you can see my cursor here. So we got proposals in the fall. This was an odd year, it's 2021. And we moved at a very fast pace to get those reviewed. And we had some decisions made, but we haven't got a full, well, not all of those proposals were reviewed and decided upon in full. Something that I believe needs to happen. We're now here in March. The next meeting isn't until June, and this biennium ends in June of next year. So the clock is ticking very quickly when we meet only quarterly. So again, if decisions could be made today, I'm not advocating for that. I certainly think that those proposals deserve very careful review and discussion. So Scott's proposal of maybe having a follow-up meeting to review each of those proposals, and I think it might be appropriate at this time to have the authors of those proposals have the opportunity to present their ideas and answer your questions. Maybe we do that before the June meeting, maybe within the next couple of weeks, if
I think that's good.
the board would like to do. Again, there are other options. Funds could be reserved to support a small budget. And again, I have a number of those proposals in hand. Those include thymine research, that is the effects of thiamine and broodstock on the performance of their offspring. You've heard a bit about that from Dr. Amy Reed, a proposal from Craig Lawson, senior technician out at the OHRC, who's looking across our angler caught broodstock programs to develop best management practices. And there are a number of others coming in. So those are smaller budget projects that might warrant support through the dedicated research fund. This is for the board to decide. So with that, I'll turn the floor back over to the board to discuss options or answer any of your questions.
I'm certainly not ready to vote on these things now. I think we need further discussion. I think the new board members need a chance to review them. Again, keep in mind, it's House Bill 3012 money coming from the fishermen, and knowing what, you know, their desires are. We have to see how these projects match up with that. But I understand we are obligated to get back to the people that made these proposals, and we can't delay until the next meeting. But we got to be fair about it, give our members a chance to study through them, and give the people a chance to present their projects too. And I think we have to have a special meeting to do it. I think we can probably do it in a couple hours, and if Mark will put out a poll and set up a time that most people can make it, I think that's the way we should handle it.
You might include the investigators in that too, then, Mark.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Carl?
Yeah, you might include also the people that submitted the proposals in that poll.
Absolutely.
Some might be teaching or whatever.
Okay, retired.
Do we have a motion from the board is this what the board would like to do?
I don't know if we need a motion, if there's any objections to putting it off or to having another meeting. If there's no objections, let's just set up having another meeting. If there are objections, and somebody would like to make a motion to pass them now, go ahead.
Yes, I would.
And Simon, you're making a motion for to have set a date for another meeting to review proposals.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's an excellent idea.
All right, we have a motion to have a special meeting to discuss these research projects. Do we have a second?
Second.
So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there any further discussion?
The only thing I'd like to interject is maybe a structure for that, which would be if you said there are 4 of them that were under consideration.
And we could consider others at the same time too. We can consider other proposals at the meeting as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess to try to go ahead.
No, Seth, I think absolutely there needs to be a structure. I think we need to maybe have an opportunity for each researcher to present their idea, maybe in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Some follow-up questions. And, for
that's what.
For everyone.
That's what I was going to suggest was basically each one get 10 minutes to present, 5 minutes for questions. And then we, if that's an hour, that would allow us to cover 4. If we opted to do 6, we'd get an hour and a half. Plus we would need then to close, have the presenters, the researchers leave the board, have half an hour roughly to kind of discuss the merits of that, and then decide, which ones we think, we want to basically go on. Would that work?
That sounds like a good.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. And also, I think, Seth, like if you or your group has a proposal, I mean, we don't need to go through that whole proposal, but if you say you have a project that ought to be further considered too, or if somebody else does, that could be brought up. We won't have time to go through them all, but that could be part of the discussion afterward.
I don't think we can ask the investigators to leave the meeting because it's a public meeting.
Okay. So then at the end, we would just discuss that openly, and that's fine. I guess and clear how that works, so they can stay on if they'd like, but we'll basically pivot where we're going to discuss it, and they can stay if they'd like. That was the primary thing, just to pivot the conversation, not that it would be private. So yeah.
So we have a motion. We have a motion. We have a motion to have a special meeting within the next couple of weeks. We have a second. We haven't had any opposition to doing that meeting. So with that, we'll make the motion pass, then have Mark set it up. Okay.
That's good.
Are we ready for Carl, or should we go to public comment?
I have one last question before we move off this topic. Would the board like me to also provide you with the small budget proposals that I've received to date? Given that they won't have received the scrutiny of technical reviews that were made over the larger budget project proposals that we received in the fall. Would you like to see those and have those researchers also present their study designs?
Yes, I would.
Well, what would that extend the count to then, Mark, if those are included? Like how many small projects then?
I'll have to dig through my files, Seth, but I think it'd be like maybe 3 more.
Okay. Maybe we can come up with a modified, structure to be able to allow us to cover those quickly. And then I guess if we think that maybe the efficient thing too would be, if we end up deciding they appear to have merit, would then be to get some folks tasked to it to be able to, do that technical review before we end up, committing funding on them, or have the option for that at least. And that would, at least they're not sort of evenly distributing their effort over everything, and we focus on the ones that we think have the most merit.
Sure, I can try to do that. It's not always easy to get volunteers to provide technical review on proposals.
No, I'm sure. Well, I mean, it'd be something we could ask for. I guess we may not get it, but once we go through that meeting, we'll know where we want to focus our things, and you can tell us what's been done on those and give us a caveat around that. That sounds like a good approach.
Okay, sure. Agreed. And moving forward, I think the board may want to consider sort of a different approach than we, it took at the beginning of this new process. I think it should be a little surprised that we're learning a bit as we kick off a new RFP process. It may make sense to advertise funding for large and small projects and have all of those come in more or less at the same time, and then all of them get technical review. So that could be one way to do it. Another way to do it might be to continue advertising for the larger budget proposals, reserving some funds for small projects that then get less scrutiny, but the board could review and decide upon those throughout the course of the year. So those are all things for the board to consider for this upcoming meeting. That's, I think, still on the table. But we'll just bring in those smaller proposals and have them present in sort of a modified, shorter format than the larger proposals.
I support that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's all I have.
Anything else, Mark? Should we go on to Carl?
Do you want to make me co-host?
Carl,
again?
can you share your screen? Oh, sure. You are
You're on, I think.
I believe you are. I removed them. I'm going to make you co-host again, and I hope you can share your screen.
I do too. I don't know what happened. Okay,
Do you see that option now?
I see it. I've got it, and I'm opening my PowerPoint. Share. Okay, and now play mode. It's weird. I did it again. Oh, I did it again. I'm not touching anything, and it's just doing this.
So I think the issue is that you may want to, I think we can work with this anyhow, Carl. I think you can just advance from here.
Let's do that.
We'll see all of your notes, but if that's okay.
I don't have notes. I don't have notes.
Okay.
That's fine. So the project that I'm talking about is the olfactory imprinting project. And when David sadly passed away a little over a year ago, Selena asked if I would step in as the PI for a couple reasons. The money runs through OSUs. They needed an OSU faculty member. And secondly, I've done a lot of work that's very similar to this and I've published in this area. And what I'm not going to do is spend any time at all on the details of this project. You guys have all read the annual report, and Mark made a nice presentation on this in the fall. So if you want any of the details, catch me afterwards. And I'm going to try to rush you because I think I have less than 10 minutes left. But the real problem is one that relates to the Endangered Species Act and also protecting other fishes at risk relative to the possibility of hatchery spawners in a river and the effects they might have on wild populations. And then the second problem is that we have to meet fishery needs. And because of that, the solution are the OHRC missions to do research to be protective of the wild fish in the presence of hatchery fish, and also to do something to ensure there's a robust fishery. The proportion of hatchery spawners in the wild really is an important thing for management of fishes all up and down the West Coast and across all the different species. I've just picked some examples here, but there's probably hundreds of stocks that management is involved with regarding PHOS. So that problem somehow has to be solved. And to do that, our project is trying to prevent the hatchery fish from spawning in the wild or interbreeding with wild fish. So that's the objective of this particular project. And as was alluded to earlier, the triploid rainbow program has done that remarkably well for rainbow trout, but this kind of thing where you're creating sterile populations doesn't work for anadromous fish because they basically then don't come back from the ocean. So we can't use triploidy. But what can perhaps be done is to create reproductive isolation by creating better homing to the hatchery. In other words, we can get fish to come to the hatchery rather than straight to the wild, then that fixes the PHOS problem. Olfaction is a really, really important sense amongst the animal kingdom, and it's the basis for freshwater homing. So this project is aimed at trying to figure out a way to increase imprinting in the hatchery by using odorants so that the fish won't stray into the wild. The center of the project is at Elk River Hatchery. And the species that's being part of the research is the false Chinook. But what I should add is what we're trying to do is a proof of concept here. We're trying to show that this technology could work basically anywhere and probably with any species. That doesn't mean there can't be refinements made and that sort of thing. But the real idea here is not just to fix a problem in the elk, but to make something that could be useful across the range of the fishes. Now, you guys have all been tasked with studying these flow charts, and I know you can't read these, so I'm going to ignore them. But basically, like Mike Bluen did, I have a really simple version of this that you will be able to follow. And what I'm going to concentrate on, again, is not the details, but rather where we are on the project. When are we going to come to an end here so you can understand where we are and that this is going to come to an end in just a couple of years, really. So if we start with the mission, we have to do a literature review. That literature review has been completed. And that basically then led to the need to potentially figure out what imprinting odorants we could use in the hatchery and what other compounds one could add to hatchery water that would be better for the fish to imprint so they wouldn't stray to the wild. That required figuring out what are these compounds that fish can actually detect. That's been done by our NIMS cooperator up in Seattle. Looking from recordings of the olfactory nerve. So can they detect something? What's the minimum level they can detect? Then we had to prove these chemicals were neutral. This was done by David and his gang at the OHRC by doing Y-maze studies to prove they aren't attractive or repulsive. Then once we knew that fish could recognize these compounds, could they actually use these compounds in making decisions? And so that was done by work at the OHRC and conditioning studies. In addition, the project analyzed river water to make sure there weren't compounds in that river that could confound the recognition of these odorants. And this is being done by a German cooperator. He has 2 publications out on this now, but it's still a work in progress. In addition, we wanted to know what was the behavior of hatchery fish and wild fish as they come up to spawn. And so that study was also done by implanting radio tags and then tracking the fish, and the papers are published. By the way, for the newer folks on the board, all these papers that we've been talking about are available to you on the board's website, on the OHRC website. So, work on IDing odorants has been completed. That's finished. But it's led in 2 different directions. And that's why it's hard to put this sort of thing onto the flow chart that Scott put together, which is a really good planning document, but it's hard to discuss where you are. So it basically shows 2 different directions that we could take. One of these was that there's a difference probably between fish that are reared on river water versus those that were reared on well water. So an experiment was done in 2017 and repeated in 2018, where groups of fish were reared on well water and river water. They were tagged and then released to the ocean. You can see the colored wire tags on the left if you're not familiar with them there in that circle. So these rearing, release, and homing trials basically were done by the project, but ODF&W runs the hatchery. The hatchery managers and staff there have been really, really great to work with on this. And then at no cost to the project, also ODF&W monitors returns of these fish and then collects snouts from these fish. So from this particular trial, there have been snouts collected from the 2020 return and then last fall's return. But because of staffing shortage due to the pandemic, the snouts haven't been read yet. So we're told that the snouts will have been read this spring. So at our next board meeting, or maybe not the one where we decide on the research projects, but the one in June, we should have some results for you. This project will finish in 2024. That's when the last fish will come back. So there's no more experimental work being done on this in the hatchery. We're just waiting for the fish to come back and then ODF&W to give us the data. So the other direction that this project showed is that there are potentially a whole bunch of different compounds that can be used to imprint fish with, that you can administer in the hatchery and add to the fish ladder when they come back. And about 30 of these have been tested. From these 30, it was decided that the best targets to test would be 3 amino acids. In other words, a mixture was made, a cocktail was made of 3 amino acids that then could be used for imprinting. And in addition to that, in the present biennium that we're in, it's possible that we could maybe come up with cheaper compounds or better compounds. And then another thing that's being looked at is transcriptomics, which is gene expression. In other words, when is it that you really can best imprint a fish? And maybe the genes can tell us that. And also, what is it that maybe the fish can recognize better? And maybe the genes can tell us that. So that's also happening right now as we're speaking. So where is this amino acid imprinting pointing to? Well, basically what we decided was that there are 2 life stages that might be important for imprinting. One are the eggs and embryos, and the other are actually the fish themselves, more at the smolt stage. So there are 2 treatments that have been reared and are being reared at the Elk River Hatchery. One treatment involves the embryos and eggs, and then there's a very separate treatment that involves the fish themselves. And then there are controls that they're being compared to. So eggs and embryos were treated in the incubators, fish were treated in the raceways, they were all marked, and they were released. So where are we on this task? Well, this has been basically done completely over 2 brood years in 2020 and 2021. Those fish are out in the ocean. Some have come back already. And the 2022, this year's treatment groups are presently underway. They will be done and released this coming fall. So that will be completely done. So the next step is to scent the return ladders. And this was been done for the 2021 returns. Those will be jacks. So those snouts are in hand. And like I said, ODF&W collects the snouts. They basically do the reading of the tags. then they will give us the data. And so 2021 is done, and this whole project then, in other words, all the fish that are out in the ocean will be finished in 2026. So essentially, the project has about 4 more years to run, and then we'll know how well it worked or not. Data soon, though. Hopefully, we'll be able to share also what the jack return rates were like. So the decisions that can be made from these test results really depends obviously on how successful it was. And that again goes in 2 different directions. And one of these relates to the possibility that if PHOS is low because we can imprint fish to hatchery water, that basically means that we could really help fish at risk. They wouldn't have to worry about hatchery fish, which would help with ESA and other management issues. But in addition, if PHOS is low, it could be very possible to transfer this information to other facilities and other species that have the capability of releasing more fish. You know, a lot of hatcheries are limited by how much water they have and they can't release more fish, but a decision could be made that if we released more hatchery fish at certain places, they could contribute to the fishery, and any other fish that are there would return to the hatchery and wouldn't spawn in the wild. So I think this project has 2 very realistic and very useful objectives: getting the PHOS issues resolved, and then also maybe increasing the fishery. So with that, if we have a time, I'll entertain any questions.
Are there any questions from the board for Carl?
Yeah, Carl, I just had a quick clarification on we're going to monitor more than hatchery returns. We're also going to monitor hatchery fish spawning in the wild. Isn't that correct? To look at PHOS?
That's correct. Both hatchery fish, ODF&W monitors fish in the hatchery and also monitors fish in the river.
Right. So for the jacks this year, we also looked at, did they recover coated wire tag jacks out in the Elk River itself?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, there's no further questions for Carl. I think we're ready for public comment. I see we have some folks on there. Would anybody like to make a comment? I don't know what happened to Reese Bender. I saw him on there earlier. Is he still around? Yeah, there he is. Yeah, Reese, I've known Reese, he's from this area. He was a ex-ODFW biologist and he's pretty engaged yet. So what did you think of our meeting?
Yeah, I was very impressed, and especially in Michael Banks' presentation, some real serious potential there. And of course, I'm always interested in Elk River since I started my career there. A lot of potential there too. So yeah, it's thanks for the opportunity to tune in and keep up the good work.
Thanks, Reese. Do we have any other public who would like to make a comment?
Yes, Chair
If
Starkey.
not- Yes.
Chair Starkey, good afternoon, Vice Chair Pavlik and members of the board. If I may, my name is James Fraser. I'm the Oregon Policy Advisor for Trout Unlimited. I just wanted to chime in and say I really appreciate the discussion on the various topics today, and especially want to welcome the 2 new board members, Thomas Alkire and Seth Eisenberg. But I'd like to provide a minor point of feedback for the board's consideration today regarding how votes are taken and recorded, because some of those procedures today were not clear, and that can affect the public's ability to understand the board's activities. As mentioned by Chair Starkey at the beginning of today's meetings, the board's charter does provide that Robert's Rules of Order will control, which allow for taking votes by unanimous consent. But I do want to point out that the charter also provides that a board member must call for a vote. So as a member of the public tracking the board's activities, I respectfully request that all action items noted in the agenda receive a full roll call vote by the board members rather than taking votes by unanimous consent. There's an additional benefit to that procedure, and then it's easier to track quorum requirements when the board takes a full roll call vote. Relatedly, I'd also respectfully request that the voting status for all 12 members be fully accounted for. For example, on the annual report vote, there were 7 aye votes, 2 nay, and 2 abstaining, which implies that there's another board member that was either excused from attendance or absent, but not documented that way in the record. So the status of that 12th member's vote, whether the member was excused or absent, should also be noted in the public record. So thank you for considering those comments, which are just intended to improve the public's ability to follow the board's activities. And I thank you all for your time.
Yeah, thanks for the input. We'll try to keep on track a little better. We'll try to follow the rules a little better. Any other comments? If not, I'll give a quick closing here. I just want to mention one thing about these flow charts. I mean, some of you hadn't heard about the flow charts. Where they came from for each project is way back in the beginning when these projects were first proposed, right after the board was formed. The scientists made a proposal that was, a written page of what they were going to do. And some of us couldn't track that. So we worked through the process. Since we're responsible for keeping the projects online and the budget, and we couldn't understand them, we drafted out these flow charts and then asked the scientists to go through and correct them and set them up. And so each of those charts were kind of roughly drafted and then corrected and approved by the scientists themselves. So it's not, they call them my flow charts, but they're not mine. I initiated it, but it didn't end up with it. I'm sorry for running into the overtime. I just want to remind you that our normal meetings, when we can meet in person, are usually from 9 to 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So with these Zoom meetings, they're harder to keep our attention, but we have to shorten up too, and there's a lot to cover. So I'm sorry that we had to run overtime. Following up, Mark, could you send us a record link so if anybody wants to listen in that missed the meeting, so we could give them that link?
I can certainly post this a recording of this message.
Thank you.
Assuming
Mark, you'll also send out the budget reports that you reviewed with us today. Thank you. And we will put together a special meeting proposal that will be coming up pretty soon to try to do within the next couple of weeks. I think that's about it. If there's any other comments, Steve, I'd appreciate it if you could, you cited, you had some information on some incubation box studies that showed they were ineffective. If you could find that research and cite it for me and send it to me, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I cited, there's a link in my comments on the draft for the report that it has one of those studies, Scott.
Okay, I'll look it up. Thank you. So Mark will probably have you'll send out a couple of suggested dates and times within the next few weeks, and then we'll try to get as many people as we can on and take care of that. Okay, is there any other comments? If not, do we have a motion to adjourn? I'm asking for a motion to adjourn if there's no other comments.
A motion, we adjourn.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn and we have a second. I guess we have to vote. So I guess take a written poll, Mark, if we want to do that properly.
So actually, I believe adjourning a meeting is, and Carl, perhaps correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it is a special case where it does not require a vote. So unless there is anyone opposed.
Right.
So barring any further discussion, the motion passed to adjourn the meeting. Thank you all.
See y'all.
We ran late.
Bye.
Mark, can you tell me who seconded that? Who seconded the motion to adjourn?
I could not hear it. Ted, did you?
I seconded it.
Okay, thank you, Peter.
Okay.
That was me. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks, Gary. I see you.
Thanks all.
Looking forward,
Thanks, guys.
looking
Bye.
forward to seeing everyone in person one day soon.
Take care.
Cheers. Thanks, everyone.
Here we go.